Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Just to get this out of the way before I begin, this really happened not long ago, and to be honest, it's been messing with my head ever since. I've told a few people, some believe it, some don't. That's fine. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm writing this from another account because I don't want this tied to anything personal, and if you knew me in real life, you'd probably understand why. I'm not someone who usually writes stories or shares things like this, but I feel like if I don't get it all out somewhere, I'm going to keep replaying it over and over in my head. So this is what happened. There's this old abandoned school right on the outskirts of town. Not too far, maybe a 15-minute walk if you cut through the industrial lot behind the train tracks. The building's been empty for years, long before I was even born. Everyone in town knows about it, but it's not exactly on the list of local tourist spots or anything. The place is fenced off, overgrown, and not open to the public. No signs saying why it shut down, just a forgotten spot on the map. A few locals say it was a reform school or something for boys who got kicked out of regular schools. Some say there were accidents, others say it was just poor funding. I never really looked into it back then. We just liked going there. Me and my group of friends had been going there on and off throughout the year. There were 6 of us usually, and the first time we went was out of boredom. We liked to explore, and the school, with its broken windows, cracked concrete, and ivy growing over the walls, looked like the perfect spot. Kind of cinematic, honestly. Like something out of those urban explorer videos you see online. It had this strange, worn-down beauty to it. There was a door in the back of the building that had clearly been pried open by someone before us. We didn't break in or anything. It was already busted. The hinges were loose. The door just kind of swung if you pushed it hard enough. That was our usual entrance. You had to duck under a low pipe and hop over a fallen locker that was always in the way. But it worked. Inside, the air always smelled stale, like mold and dust and something just slightly off. I couldn't place it, but there was always this undertone of rot or chemicals or both. The place had multiple floors. Some classrooms still had desks, others were stripped bare. We found an old science lab once, mostly cleared out except for a few tables and a single beaker left on a counter, dusty and cracked. The chalkboards had faded words scribbled across them, half equations, some weird messages, and a few names carved into the wood around the edges. The stairwells were sketchy. One time, the 3rd step collapsed under someone's foot, so we learned to skip that one. There was graffiti everywhere. Not all of it recent either. Some of it was sun-bleached and cracked, old gang tags, slurs, and random symbols no one recognized. A few doors were still locked, though we never tried too hard to force anything open. It felt like tempting fate. Every time we went, it felt a little different. Sometimes you'd hear what sounded like footsteps from upstairs, or voices echoing faintly from the halls. We'd laugh it off, chalk it up to the wind, or our own noise bouncing around the empty space. Only one of us, Ollie, ever claimed to actually see someone, like a real figure moving between rooms. He pointed it out one time, said someone was watching us from down the corridor. But Ollie was the type to stir things up just to get a reaction, so none of us took it seriously. Anyway, this one day, there were only 3 of us, me, Josh, and Mason. The others couldn't come. It was a dull Saturday afternoon, the weather kind of gray and flat. No wind, no sun, just still and cold. We got bored sitting around and decided to head back to the school. We hadn't been in a while and figured it'd be something to kill a couple hours. Getting in was the same routine. Fence, industrial lot, slipping through the broken chain link gap, walking the trail that led to the back of the school, and ducking in through the back door. Inside was quiet, more quiet than usual. It was like the air was thicker that day. Not heavy in a dramatic way, just dense somehow, like the building was holding its breath. We moved through the halls, checked out a few classrooms, went up one flight of stairs, stuck together more than we normally did. Maybe because there were only 3 of us, it felt more exposed. There was less noise, less joking around. We weren't scared, just more aware. About 20 minutes in, we heard a bang. It came from the floor above us, directly above. Not a soft creak or something falling on its own. This was a full, sharp crash, like something big was dropped or shoved. The sound echoed through the stairwell. None of us spoke. We didn't have to. We just looked at each other and moved. Fast. We turned around, went back the way we came, and made it to the back exit in less than a minute. Didn't bother looking back. When we got outside, we stopped, caught our breath, laughed nervously about it. But we didn't leave right away. I don't know why. Curiosity maybe, or just the leftover adrenaline. We lingered around the back lot, looking up at the windows. Most of them were too dirty to see through, but one in particular caught our attention. A stained glass panel, small and square, about halfway up the wall. It wasn't a church-style one or anything, just oddly colorful glass with wire mesh embedded in it. Behind it, we saw lights. Not flashlight beams, not reflections. Actual lights. Lots of them. Flickering, shifting like they were attached to something moving. It reminded me of those old control panels in science labs or janitor rooms, like someone flipping switches. We tried to get a better look, but the angle made it hard. The glass was dirty, and the wire mesh didn't help. We moved around to the side, still couldn't see in. Then, loud as anything, a horrible screech came from the tannoy system. That old PA speaker system, mounted on corners and doorways. It was a sudden mechanical whine, like an overloaded mic being shoved in your ears. Then, without warning, some kind of loud hum or noise started playing through the speakers. Not a voice, not music, just noise, loud and broken, repeating. We freaked out and bolted. No hesitation. We ran full speed toward the back fence, climbed it faster than we ever had before. As we were pulling ourselves over, we heard a dog bark. Not a far-off bark either, close. Aggressive, like it was chasing us. I hit the ground on the other side, twisted my ankle but kept moving. We all did. When we got a safe distance away, we turned to look back. No dog, no noise, nothing, just silence. The speakers were dead quiet again. No barking, no lights behind the stained glass panel. Everything just stopped. The whole building looked as dead as it always had. We didn't talk much after that. Just went home. Didn't even message each other later that night. It felt like none of us wanted to bring it up. And that would have been it. Just a weird day we all quietly agreed to forget. But then about a week later, the news broke. The school burned down. The building was destroyed overnight. No casualties. No planned demolition. No electrical grid even connected to the place, so it wasn't faulty wiring. People speculated arson. Some thought maybe squatters accidentally started something. The papers didn't say much. Just a photo of the place gutted by flames. A blackened husk. Roof caved in. Walls cracked. You could see parts of the fence melted, the grass scorched in patches. The fire must have been brutal. People were talking about it online. Local Facebook groups, forums. A few old photos of the place surfaced. That's when I stumbled on the part that really twisted my stomach. Back in 1952, that school had a fire. A big one. Killed 6 kids. It was a dormitory back then, for boys with behavioral issues. One of the few state-run institutions in the area. The fire started overnight, some electrical problem in the dorm wing. The sprinklers failed, or maybe there weren't any installed back then. The whole top floor was engulfed before anyone could get out. 6 boys died. The place closed not long after that, and the building was left to rot. No one ever told us that. It wasn't some local ghost story. It was just history, forgotten and left to fade. It's hard not to think about that now. The lights we saw, the banging noise, the screeching speakers, that barking. What were we hearing? What was being powered if there was no electricity? Why that day? And the fire. Not planned, not expected. Just like the first one, decades earlier. We haven't been back. The building's gone now. Nothing left but blackened concrete and a temporary chain link fence with a warning sign zip-tied to it. I drove past once just to see. It looked smaller than I remembered. Quiet. Like whatever lived there, whatever energy the place held, was finally gone. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe someone else was in there that day, playing a prank or messing around. Maybe the fire had nothing to do with us. Maybe. But I've been back through the timeline over and over again, and nothing really adds up. That place wasn't supposed to be alive. There wasn't supposed to be power. The PA system shouldn't have worked. The lights we saw weren't flashlights. The dog we heard wasn't real. Nothing we experienced fits into anything normal. I don't know what to make of it. And the weirdest part is, I didn't even know about the 1952 fire until I started writing this just now. I Googled it while trying to remember the name of the school, and there it was, right there on an old town archive page. A scan of a newspaper, yellowed and torn. 6 boys, 1 dorm room, a fire that nobody could explain. We weren't supposed to be there. And now, there's no school left to go back to. We never talked about it again, and honestly, I don't think we ever will. Last Christmas, I was spending the evening with my fiancée at her apartment. It was just one of those lazy, cozy nights. We were sitting on the couch, both of us working on homework and just hanging out. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp beside us, casting long shadows against the walls. The quiet buzz of the city outside filtered in through the closed windows, but the apartment felt peaceful. We didn't talk much, just the occasional comment about our assignments, but there was something about that night, something that, in retrospect, felt off. It started with a sound. It was subtle at first, just a faint screech, the kind you might hear when tires scrape against the pavement. But this was different. It felt like it was in the distance, too far for me to actually hear it. I'm partially deaf, so it didn't make sense that I'd catch the sound at all. It was almost like a trick of my mind, like the noise was traveling in some weird way, bouncing around the city until it reached me. I didn't mention it to my fiancée at first. She didn't seem to notice anything, and it didn't seem like a big deal. I just brushed it off as some odd city noise, maybe from downtown, which was close by. 5 minutes passed, and then it happened again. This time, it was closer, much closer. I looked at my fiancée, and she raised an eyebrow, her expression asking the same question I was thinking. What was that? Again, we didn't say anything, but both of us had the same thought. We both knew downtown was close by, so maybe it was something from there, some truck or car making a turn or something like that. We didn't think much more of it. But then the third time it happened, I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just the sound of tires screeching. This time it was much louder, and it was definitely closer. I could almost feel the vibrations through the walls of the apartment. It wasn't just an ordinary sound. It was an unearthly wail, an unnatural scream that seemed to slice through the air, high-pitched and intense. I looked at my fiancée again, and we both froze for a moment, just staring at each other. Something wasn't right. The thing that stood out, though, was that it wasn't just the sound of tires screeching. The pitch of the sound was fluctuating, changing rapidly, almost like it was some kind of living thing. It couldn't have been a recording. It was real, and it was alive. It felt like the sound was coming from something, or someone, screaming with pain or terror, but not in a way a person could scream. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. We tried to laugh it off, joking about how weird the sound was, but it felt forced. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was lurking outside. I kept thinking about the wail, how fast it had gotten closer, and how we both felt this tension building. But we didn't say anything. We didn't want to admit that we were freaked out. We just brushed it off as a bizarre urban noise. Then it happened again. This time, it was even closer. It was about 5 blocks away, and it sounded like it was moving fast, too fast. The time between the wails had shortened, and they were coming faster and faster, like something or someone was moving closer at an alarming rate. It felt wrong. My fiancée looked at me, her face pale. She must have been feeling the same thing, because she didn't try to laugh it off this time. I could see her tense up, her body language telling me she was as unsettled as I was. The next time, I could hear the wail much clearer. It sounded like it was right outside, just down the street. My heart started pounding in my chest. The wail had an eerie quality to it, something almost unnatural about it. It didn't feel like a human scream, not at all. And as it reached the end of the street, there was no time for it to have come from anywhere else. We both knew there was no way something could travel that quickly in the city. I started to move, instinctively locking windows and doors. My fiancée grabbed my hand, and we started to head down the hall towards her room. I felt like something was closing in on us. My mind raced, and I could barely think straight. Every muscle in my body was tight with fear. My fiancée's hands were shaking as she grabbed something from her bookshelf, a thick, old book she kept for some reason. She started flipping through the pages, her movements frantic, as if she was looking for something. I couldn't take my eyes off the hallway. It felt like we were being watched, like something was out there in the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike. We were moving quickly now, trying not to make a sound, but it didn't matter. The wail, the scream, it was so close now. So damn close. It sounded like it was right outside her apartment door. And then it came. The fifth wail. It wasn't a wail anymore. It was pure terror, something almost human but not quite. I've never heard anything so spine-chilling in my life. It cut through the air like a blade, and I froze. My fiancée too. We both jumped into her room, slamming the door behind us, and she started tearing through her book, scanning the pages at an insane pace. I didn't know what she was looking for, but I didn't care. All I could think about was that sound, that horrible, wailing scream that was now echoing in my mind. We stayed there, not saying a word, just listening to the silence that followed the scream. Every moment felt like an eternity. I kept my eyes on the door, half expecting it to burst open. I didn't know what was outside, but I didn't want to find out. I didn't want to face whatever it was. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. We stayed in that room, not moving, not making a sound. We didn't talk about what had just happened, didn't even acknowledge it. It felt like if we said anything, it would make it real. Like if we spoke about it, it might come back. So we sat in the dark, in silence, waiting. I kept my gaze fixed on the door, listening for any sounds, anything that might suggest something was outside. Around midnight, the sound of a car pulling into the parking lot broke the silence. I didn't even look out the window to see who it was, but I knew. It had to be her mom coming home. My fiancé and I exchanged a look, our faces pale. We both felt the same sense of dread, but at least we weren't alone anymore. Her mom came inside, greeted us, and immediately asked why we were both sitting in the dark. My fiancé and I exchanged a glance before we both started talking at once, trying to explain what had just happened. We told her everything, the screams, the strange noise, how close it had gotten. We were both so rattled that our words were jumbled, but her mom just listened, her expression unreadable. After a long, tense silence, she finally spoke. Sounds like a banshee. Neither of us said anything. It didn't matter what she called it. It was just a name, just a label. What mattered was the fact that something terrifying, had been outside. We didn't know what it was, but we knew it wasn't something natural. The way it sounded, the way it moved, it felt like something not from this world. I never figured out what it was, or why it happened. I don't think I'll ever fully understand it. But that night, that noise, it stuck with me. It haunted me. And to this day, whenever I hear a strange noise in the city, I wonder if it's the same thing. Whatever it was, I don't think we'll ever know. But one thing is certain, it was real, and it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. When I was 8 years old, I used to have private Quran reading lessons with a tutor. These lessons were something I looked forward to because they were calming, and I always enjoyed the moments when my tutor would explain different verses and their meanings. But the place where we had these lessons wasn't inside a room, it was on the terrace of our backyard. It wasn't anything fancy. It was a small, quiet garden surrounded by walls that were about 10 feet tall, and there were smaller houses just outside. We used to sit at a small table near the edge of the terrace, with the soft glow of the evening sun slowly fading as we read. The air would often feel fresh, and the garden was peaceful, so it was a good place to focus. That night, I remember everything about the lesson being like any other. The smell of the earth was mixed with the faint scent of jasmine from the plants nearby, and the sound of crickets filled the air as my tutor and I sat together. He was about 60 years old, with a white beard and glasses, and he always spoke in a calm, measured tone, which made me feel safe. He had been my tutor for as long as I could remember, and I always felt a sense of comfort during those lessons. But something happened that night, something that I can never forget. As we were sitting there, I had just finished reading a verse and was waiting for him to explain it to me. The evening was quiet, almost too quiet. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a massive fireball appeared in the sky, falling quickly outside the wall of our backyard. It was so sudden and so bright that I thought I had imagined it for a moment. But I hadn't. It was huge, bigger than any fire I had ever seen, about the size of a car, and it was glowing a deep maroonish red color. The light it gave off wasn't like regular orange fire. It was a strange, almost unnatural color that made my stomach churn. The fireball didn't make a sound. There was no explosion, no crash. It was silent like a falling star, except it was way too close, and there was nothing magical or beautiful about it. I felt my body freeze. It was like the world had stopped for a split second. My heart started pounding in my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. I looked at my tutor, and his face was pale. He didn't say anything immediately, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He stared at the fireball for a moment, and then without saying a word, he stood up quickly and grabbed my arm, pulling me inside the house. His hands were trembling slightly, and I could hear his hurried breathing. I followed him, not really understanding what had just happened, but instinctively knowing it was something terrible. Once inside, we stood in the hallway. The whole house felt unnervingly still, like it was holding its breath. My tutor, usually so composed, was visibly shaken. I don't think he knew what to do. He didn't say anything for a long time, but I could feel the tension in the air. The strange light from the fireball had lit up the backyard and parts of the house, and even though the house was now completely dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just happened, something beyond my understanding. I wasn't alone in my fear. My maid, who was upstairs and nowhere near the backyard, suddenly appeared at the bottom of the stairs. She looked frantic, her face flushed with worry. She rushed to us, asking if we were okay, and I could tell she had been terrified. She was looking around, as if expecting something to come bursting through the walls. I couldn't hold back my tears. I felt a lump in my throat, and I couldn't stop crying. I didn't know why, but I thought it was the end of the world. My mind raced. Was that a meteor? A bomb? Was something happening in the world? And this fireball was just the beginning? My thoughts were all over the place, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. But all I could think was that the fireball had come to destroy everything. We stayed inside the house for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. My tutor seemed to calm down a bit, but I could still see the fear in his eyes. It was unsettling to see someone so old and experienced react like that. My maid, who had been standing near the door, finally went outside to check the backyard. I could see her from the window, walking cautiously around the garden. It felt like a dream, something that didn't belong in the real world. I kept waiting for the sound of an explosion or something worse, but nothing came. In the morning, everything seemed too quiet. The sun had risen, and the light felt almost too normal after the events of the night before. My maid, still a little shaken, went next door to talk to our neighbors. She asked if they had seen anything unusual during the night, anything that could explain the fireball we had seen. They hadn't seen anything. They hadn't heard any explosion, no loud sound, no sign of something falling from the sky. They were all confused, just like we were. As the day went on, the feeling of dread didn't go away. The fireball had landed so close to our backyard wall, yet no one else had seen it. It didn't make sense. How could something that big and that bright fall right outside our house, and yet no one else had noticed it? There was no crash. There were no marks on the ground. It was as if it had simply vanished, leaving no trace of its existence except for the memory of the terrifying moment. It bothered me for days after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened, something that no one could explain. I would lie in bed at night, trying to sleep, but all I could see in my mind was that huge fireball falling from the sky. I wondered if it had been a sign. My tutor, who had always seemed so calm and collected, never talked about it again. He didn't even mention it when I saw him next. But I could see in his eyes that he was as disturbed by it as I was. It was clear that neither of us could find an explanation. That experience changed something inside me. I didn't understand much about the world at that age, but I did know that something had happened that night that had shaken me to my core. I became more religious after that. I started reading more about the world and trying to understand what could explain such a strange event. I didn't find any answers, but I turned to religion as a way to cope with the fear that still lingered in my mind. I prayed more, asking for safety, for understanding, for peace. Years have passed since that night. I'm not the same person I was when I was 8. I've grown up, and I've started questioning everything I once believed in. I'm not sure what happened that night anymore. I'm not sure I even believe in all the things I used to. I've become agnostic, maybe even leaning toward atheism. I don't know if there's a higher power watching over us, or if the universe is just a random collection of events. But I can't forget that night. I can't forget the fear I felt, and I can't forget how that fireball made me feel like the world was coming to an end. Even now, whenever I think back to that moment, I still get chills. I don't know if it was a meteor, a military experiment, or something else entirely. I don't know why no one else saw it, or why it didn't make a sound. But I do know this, it was real. And whatever it was, it left an imprint on my mind that I don't think I'll ever fully understand. I headed out for my usual evening jog that day. the sun hanging just low enough in the sky that everything had a golden tint. It was late enough that I knew I wouldn't be out too long. Just enough time for a 6-mile loop, the kind of jog that always left me feeling winded but satisfied. The hills behind my house were quiet, only a few cars passing by occasionally as I ran past their driveways, and the air was still enough that I could hear my own breathing echoing in my ears. The dirt roads in these hills were familiar to me. I'd run them countless times before, but I always felt a sense of calm when I passed the point where they began to wind up into the higher, rougher parts of the land. These hills were wild and untamed, but it was the kind of wild that didn't scare me. They were just part of the landscape I knew so well. It wasn't a difficult route. The first few miles were mostly downhill, giving me an easy pace. As I made my way up the hills, I could hear the rhythmic crunch of my shoes against the dirt, each step pushing me forward. The evening sky grew darker, the sun slipping behind the hills, leaving just a soft twilight glow that made the whole world feel muted and quiet. The only light that remained was the fading blue of the sky overhead, and even that seemed distant. The road I was on was a temporary path, cut into the land for a future housing development. For now, it was a simple dirt road that twisted and turned as it cut through the hills. It wasn't unusual to see signs of construction here and there, discarded materials, the occasional vehicle parked by the side, things like that. It wasn't far from my house, but I often preferred to run here instead of the crowded streets around town. The isolation of it gave me a sense of peace. As I approached the 4-mile mark, I felt the evening air grow cooler, the wind picking up slightly, though it wasn't enough to slow my pace. I was close to the halfway point, the point where I'd usually turn back, but something about that evening told me I could keep going. I didn't feel tired yet, and the twilight, the quietness, it all felt too perfect to stop just yet. That's when I noticed him. There was a coyote sitting about 20 feet off the side of the road, perched on a small hill to my right. He wasn't moving, just sitting there, perfectly still, looking directly at me. His fur was a mix of grays and browns, blending seamlessly with the dusty earth beneath him. He looked almost regal, his eyes focused and unblinking, as if he were studying me. The kind of stare that made you stop for a moment and wonder what was going on behind those amber eyes. I didn't break my stride, but I did glance at him as I passed. There was something mesmerizing about him, but I didn't want to get distracted. It wasn't unusual to see coyotes in these hills, especially around twilight, but the way he was watching me made me feel like I should be paying more attention than usual. Still, I pushed the thought aside. It was just a coyote. But then, after a few moments, I felt it. The unmistakable sound of paws on dirt. I glanced to my left and saw 3 more coyotes running parallel to me, just 20 feet off the road, their movements as fluid as the wind. They were keeping pace, matching my speed, their eyes fixed on me, their bodies in perfect synchronization. My stomach tightened as I realized what was happening. There was something unnerving about the way they moved. These weren't the usual casual wanderers I'd seen in the past. These coyotes were focused, their bodies tense with purpose. My breath caught in my throat as I realized they were keeping up with me, not slowing down, not veering off to the side. They were running with me. A shiver ran down my spine, and my heart rate picked up. I hadn't thought much about it at first, but now the reality set in. I was running through the hills, it was twilight, and there were 4 coyotes, 4, running near me, keeping up with me. They were only 20 feet away, and I was alone. I glanced to my right, back at the first coyote. He hadn't moved an inch, still watching me from his perch. But now I was starting to feel that creeping unease, the primal instinct that said something wasn't right. Coyotes didn't act like this, not when they were alone, and certainly not in a pack. I looked around frantically, my mind racing for a solution. There was nothing nearby. No tree branches, no sticks. Nothing but dirt and gravel beneath my feet. The only thing I could find was a rock, a large one, about the size of my fist, sitting just off the side of the road. I grabbed it, my fingers wrapping around its rough surface, feeling the weight of it in my palm. My legs burned, my breath quickened, but I couldn't slow down now. I had to get out of there. I pushed myself harder, my legs pumping faster, the sound of my footfalls louder in my ears as I picked up the pace. The coyotes matched my speed, still running alongside me, their eyes glinting in the fading light. They were close now, close enough that I could hear their paws hitting the dirt with each stride, their breaths coming in shallow bursts, like they were getting more excited the faster I ran. My lungs burned with the effort, my legs screaming with the effort of pushing myself beyond my usual pace. I was close to the end of my run, just a couple more miles to go, but every instinct in my body was telling me I had to get away. I was no longer thinking about fitness, about keeping my pace steady. All I could think about was getting home, getting somewhere safe. The coyotes were still there, just a few feet away now, as though they were feeding off my fear, getting closer with every passing second. I could hear them breathing, their bodies still running in perfect sync with mine. I gripped the rock in my hand tighter, my fingers slipping slightly as sweat began to form on my palms. And then, as suddenly as it had started, they darted off. It wasn't a gradual retreat, no slow fading into the distance. One moment they were there, running in parallel to me, and the next they were gone, disappearing into the trees and the underbrush along the side of the road. I slowed to a jog, my heart hammering in my chest, my legs still trembling with the effort of running faster than I ever had before. The silence around me felt deafening after the rush of the chase. I couldn't understand what had just happened. What had I been running from? I kept running, my pace slower now, but still on edge. My mind kept playing over the events, trying to make sense of it all. What had they wanted? Why had they run with me like that? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. When I finally reached the end of my run, the familiar sights of my neighborhood were a welcome relief. I slowed to a walk, my breath still coming in sharp gasps, my body drenched in sweat. The coyotes were gone, but their presence lingered in my mind, as though they had been following me the entire time, even after they disappeared from sight. I looked back at the road, but there was no sign of them, no movement in the trees, just the faint glow of streetlights ahead, marking the end of my jog, the end of the night. I told myself it had just been a strange coincidence, a fluke of nature. Coyotes were known to travel in packs, after all. But that thought didn't ease the unease that clung to me. I knew something wasn't quite right. It wasn't just a casual encounter. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew I had been running for more than just the thrill of a jog. I had been running for my life. When I was younger, I was always fascinated by supernatural stuff. Not in the witches and vampires kind of way, but more in the religious, almost obsessive curiosity kind of way. It was a byproduct of being raised in an extremely religious family. The kind of household where we went to church multiple times a week, had long conversations about heaven and hell at the dinner table, and where even things like Pokemon or Harry Potter were frowned upon because of spiritual implications. My parents believed very strongly in the presence of evil, demons, and spiritual warfare, and that all of it was very real and very active in the world around us. By the time I was around 13 or 14, I had started to question a lot of that. Not in a rebellious way, but more out of genuine curiosity. I wanted to understand the darker side of things better. I still believed in God and in good and evil, but I started seeking out books and stories that talked about the spiritual realm in a more historical or investigative way. I wanted to learn about where the ideas of demons came from, how different cultures described them, what ancient texts said. I wasn't trying to summon anything or do anything dangerous, but I wanted knowledge. I thought if I just read enough, I could understand what was real and what was just fear. That summer, I went camping with my grandparents. It was something we did every year. They had this old motorhome from the 70s, the kind with the mustard yellow appliances and brown shag carpet. The whole thing smelled like old wood, sun-dried upholstery, and sometimes faintly of gasoline. It had this thick, heavy feel to it, like the air inside never quite moved the same way it did outside. I loved it though. It felt like a time capsule. We had parked in a state park, near a small lake surrounded by pine trees and dry brush. I remember the heat that week was dry and buzzing with insects. The sound of cicadas seemed to follow us everywhere we went. My grandparents had set up their usual camp, lawn chairs, a small folding table, a cooler with sodas and sandwiches. I spent a lot of time sitting inside the motorhome in the afternoons, reading or just resting in the shade. The air conditioning didn't really work, so they kept the windows open with box fans buzzing on low, pulling in hot air and pushing it around lazily. Before the trip, my grandma had bought me a book from a small Christian bookstore near their house. I wish I could remember the title, but it's long gone now. It was a paperback, the cover was black and red, and the font was the dramatic kind you see in horror movies. The book was about demons, not stories or fiction, but the supposed history and theology of demonic entities across cultures. It was written from a Christian perspective, but drew in references from old texts, folklore, and even interviews with people who claimed to have experienced spiritual attacks. It was the kind of thing that my parents probably wouldn't have approved of, but my grandma had a different approach. She believed in teaching through exposure. She figured if I read about it, and it scared me, I'd draw closer to God for protection. That was her logic, anyway. I started reading the book on the second day of the trip. I would sit on the motorhome's pull-out sofa bed in the back, my back to the window, with the book propped up on my knees. The air inside was warm and still, and every once in a while the radio would give a soft hiss of static, even though it wasn't turned on. I didn't think much of it. The motorhome was old and full of weird electrical quirks. The light above the sink flickered if you turned on the bathroom fan, and the door to the fridge didn't always stay shut unless you leaned something heavy against it. Little things like that were just part of the motorhome's personality. The opening pages of the book weren't particularly scary. It started with a sort of warning, a paragraph about how demons are subtle, patient, and opportunistic. It said that when people open themselves up to studying them too deeply, especially with the wrong intentions, it can create a kind of invitation, that they're always alert, watching for that kind of thing. The author recommended praying before each chapter as a form of spiritual protection. I remember thinking that sounded dramatic and silly. I wasn't doing anything evil. I was just reading. It's not like demons would care about some kid with a book. I kept reading. The chapters got more intense as they went on. They talked about the origins of specific demonic figures, some of which I recognized from Bible stories, and others I had never heard of before. It talked about signs of spiritual influence, historical accounts of possessions, and stories of people who had turned away from darkness after experiencing something terrifying. But none of it really shook me. I had read scary books before. This one just had a lot more religious language. I didn't feel scared exactly, but I did start to feel something else. Not dread, more like discomfort, like someone was watching me read. Every so often I'd glance up and look around the motorhome, half expecting to see my grandpa coming in or my grandma poking her head in to offer me lemonade. But I was always alone. The book was dense, and the paragraphs were long, so I'd take breaks every few pages, letting my eyes rest while the fan blew warm air across my face. It was during one of those breaks that something happened. I had just finished a section where the book talked about how demons aren't usually the ones who cause loud, dramatic events. It said that more often, they influence through quiet means: fear, doubt, anxiety, unease. It claimed that they were more likely to manifest through subtle disruptions than through Hollywood-style chaos. I remember thinking that was an interesting idea, but also kind of a cop-out. If demons were real and powerful, why would they settle for something so low-key? I closed the book for a moment and rubbed my eyes. I leaned my head back against the couch and just rested for a minute. I heard the screen door of the motorhome open and close, and then my grandma's footsteps on the metal steps. She came in carrying a bottle of water and sat at the little dinette across from the kitchenette. She asked if I was still reading the book, and I nodded. I told her what I'd just read, and that I thought it was kind of silly. I said something like, "I doubt demons care about some dumb book," or something close to that. I wasn't mocking anything, just being a little dismissive. Right after I said that, the old radio built into the dashboard of the motorhome turned on by itself. It was one of those old dials that you had to turn by hand. No digital screen, just a red line that moved across a glass window as you rotated the knob. The volume knob was a little loose, and the speaker crackled when you turned it. But this time, nobody touched it. It came on with a low static hum, and then the dial started scanning. Slowly, steadily. You could hear the motor inside turning the dial, click, 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 a very faint mechanical sound. It passed through music, commercials, talk shows, and then it stopped. The voice that came through was loud and clear. A man, older sounding, with a deep southern accent, was preaching. His voice boomed through the tiny motorhome like he was standing right there with us. And what he was preaching about, I'll never forget, was hell. Not in a gentle way, either. He was full on fire and brimstone, talking about judgment, wrath, eternal suffering. He said the word demon more than once. He talked about people being deceived, led away by curiosity, tempted by things they didn't understand. I remember feeling my whole body tense up. My arms, my chest, my neck, everything felt tight, like my skin was being pulled closer to my bones. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned and looked at my grandma. She was already staring at me, her face pale, her eyes wide. She didn't say anything. She just got up, walked over to the dashboard, and turned off the radio. The motorhome went dead quiet, except for the whir of the box fan and the hum of insects outside. Neither of us said anything for a while. I just sat there, holding the book on my lap, and stared at the radio. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt scared in a way I hadn't before. Not like scared of a noise in the dark or a scary story. This was different. I felt noticed. Noticed by something I couldn't see. That was the only time something like that ever happened in the motorhome, and we camped in it a lot over the years. We went back to that same park a few more times. We parked at lakes, mountains, deserts. Nothing else ever felt like that day. The radio never turned on by itself again. I never heard another preacher's voice echo through the speakers like that. After that trip, I put the book away. I didn't finish it. I kept it for a while, tucked away in a drawer in my bedroom, but I never opened it again. Eventually, I think I gave it away, or maybe just threw it out. I don't remember. What I do remember is that every time I looked at it, I felt that same tightness in my chest. That same sense of being watched. I don't know what happened that day. I'm not claiming it was paranormal, or that I was haunted or anything like that. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. Old electronics can do strange things. Maybe the radio had a short and turned itself on. Maybe it just happened to land on that station at that moment. But I can tell you this, I never forgot how it felt. It wasn't fear of demons or hell or anything like that. It was something more personal. Like something was reminding me that I wasn't alone. That there were consequences to the things we seek out, even if we think we're doing it harmlessly. That curiosity, when aimed in the wrong direction, might get an answer we didn't expect. I've read a lot since then. About religion, about psychology, about the way our minds can trick us. I still don't know if what happened was real or just a fluke. But I've never looked at that old motorhome the same way again. Every time I walked past the dashboard, I felt a little uneasy. Not terrified, just cautious. And I never went looking for books like that again. It was over 30 years ago when I was just 8 years old, and I went on a Girl Scout trip to St. Augustine, Florida. My mom was one of the chaperones, which was pretty cool. But things took an unexpected turn when our old Chevette, the one that always seemed like it was about to fall apart, broke down halfway to our destination. It wasn't long before we realized we were stranded on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. We ended up getting a hotel room while we waited for the car to be fixed, which was a pretty big inconvenience. But looking back, I think it ended up being part of what made the trip so memorable. I had always been into anything old or creepy even at that age. Ancient places, eerie stories, spooky history. I guess you could say I was a little obsessed with anything that seemed to have a story buried beneath its surface. Mom wasn't all that keen on the idea of wandering around all day, but after enough of my nagging, she finally gave in. We went on some local tours to pass the time. The first stop was the oldest house in Florida. It was a place that felt like it had witnessed centuries of history and change. The walls, worn down by time, whispered of stories long past. I don't remember all the details, but I remember the atmosphere. It felt heavy, as though the place had absorbed the memories of everyone who had ever lived there. We walked through the rooms, looking at the furniture and old artifacts, but there was something about the air in that house, something unsettling yet fascinating. The energy of it lingered, and I was hooked. It wasn't just a house. It was a snapshot of the past, like a living museum that made you feel like you were walking through history itself. Next, we visited a native burial site. I don't know if it was the eerie silence of the place or the way the skeletons had been laid out on table-like mounds, but something about that stop really stuck with me. I couldn't help but stare at the remains, wondering what had happened to those people and how they had lived. I didn't know much about ancient cultures back then, but the sight of those bones in the quiet, overgrown field made me feel like I was standing on the edge of some kind of forgotten world. It was odd, but also incredibly fascinating. The place had been closed off in the 90s, I think, but I remember it as clearly as if I were there just yesterday. Then there was the old fort. I couldn't tell you the exact history now, but I remember standing at the edge of the stone walls and looking out at the ocean. The fort had been built centuries ago, and you could almost hear the ghosts of soldiers marching through its halls, ready for battle. I remember the cold, damp air that seemed to hang around the fort, giving everything a sense of weight, as though time had slowed down in that place. I liked it there, even though it felt kind of sad. It felt like a place of lost stories. But it was when we visited one of the houses that things got strange. It wasn't the biggest house we saw, nor the most impressive, but for some reason it stood out. I had gotten ahead of the group, something I did often, probably more out of habit than anything else, and found myself exploring the rooms by myself. The house was a small, quaint structure, set up to reflect how it would have looked in the 18th century. The furniture, the paintings, the linens, all meticulously arranged to capture a glimpse of the past. I walked through the rooms, looking at everything, taking in the details. The feel of the wood beneath my feet, the soft glow of the lamps that illuminated the space. Everything felt like it had been frozen in time. I went into a room at the end of the hall, and that's when I saw it. A painting on the wall. It wasn't an elaborate painting, not like something you would see in a museum. It was just a family portrait, a simple depiction of a dark-haired family. But there was something about it that grabbed my attention. Something so odd and remarkable that I had to show my mom. I stood there, staring at the painting, feeling as if something in it was calling out to me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew it was important, even if I didn't understand why. I turned around to leave, my heart racing, eager to find my mom so I could show her. But as I stepped into the hallway, I saw the rest of the tour group moving toward the room. The tour guide made a joke about me wandering off again, and I felt embarrassed. I was always the one getting distracted, always the one moving ahead of the group. So I quickly walked back toward my mom, who was standing near the back of the group. I didn't say anything to her at the time. I was still too caught up in the excitement of what I had just seen. I figured I'd tell her about the painting later. But then, as I rejoined the group, something happened that I didn't understand at the time. The room we had entered wasn't the same as the one I had just left. It looked completely different. The furniture was different, the walls had a different color, and there was no painting on the wall. I froze in place, my stomach dropping as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. How could it be the same room? There was no way I had walked into a different one. I had just been there, standing right in front of that painting. I felt my heart start to race as I tried to make sense of the situation. Maybe I had imagined it. No, I knew what I had seen. I could still picture that painting in my mind, clear as day. I tried to convince myself that I was just confused, that I had mixed up the rooms, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The rest of the tour moved on, and I struggled to focus on what the guide was saying. All I could think about was that room, the one I had seen and then hadn't seen. It was as if the house itself had changed on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something strange had just happened. After the tour was over, I told my mom about the painting. I explained how it had been there one moment, and then gone the next. She listened patiently and didn't dismiss me, but I could tell she thought I was just confused. She suggested we go back through the building, retracing our steps, to see if we could find the room again. So, we went through each room one by one, looking carefully at every corner, every wall. But no matter how many times we walked through, we never found that room again. The painting was gone, and the room looked exactly as it had when we first entered. I don't know what happened that day. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't explain. I was young, and my imagination was wild, but even to this day, I remember the painting and the way it seemed to disappear. It's a memory that stayed with me all these years. What gets me is the way it felt so real, so vivid, and then just gone. I can't explain it, and I don't really know if I ever will. All I know is that I saw something that doesn't fit into any neat explanation. Maybe it's just a piece of history that I'll never fully understand, or maybe it's something deeper that I'll never be able to put into words. But that day, in that house, I learned something about how quickly things can slip through our fingers, even memories. Sometimes things vanish right before our eyes, and all you're left with is the feeling that something important was lost, something you can never fully grasp again. It's strange how a single moment, a fleeting encounter, can stick with you for so long, lingering in the back of your mind, like a whisper from the past. It was just after 1 a.m. when I found myself alone in the basement of my family home, settled in on the couch in my room watching TV. I was used to being alone at night. It was something I did often when my parents were out. The house was quiet, and I liked it that way. I felt a strange sense of comfort in the silence, as if the night wrapped me in a sense of security, despite the shadows that stretched across the room. My basement was my sanctuary, my space. It was far enough from the rest of the house that I could escape the noise of my family when they were home, but still close enough that I could hear when things were happening upstairs. The noise from the kitchen, the creaks of the old wood floors, and the distant sounds of the TV or music from the second floor were often part of my environment. But tonight, there was nothing. Just the dull hum of the TV and the occasional creak of the house settling. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the house settling, just another groan of the floorboards. But then it came again, and this time it was louder. Much louder. It sounded like something, or someone was stomping around upstairs. I froze for a moment, thinking it was my parents home earlier than expected, but that didn't make sense. They had told me they wouldn't be back until much later, well past midnight. I sat still for a moment, straining my ears to listen. The noise continued, and this time, it sounded like someone was moving around the dining room. The chairs scraped against the floor. I could hear them shifting, as if someone had knocked over the entire dining room table. The clatter of furniture scraping across the hardwood floor, the shuffling footsteps, they were loud, chaotic. It wasn't just one thing moving. It was like someone had gotten into a fight with all the furniture in the room, knocking things over in the process. It was as if someone was stumbling around blindly in the dark, not caring what they hit. Panic shot through me. My first instinct was to call out, but I immediately stopped myself. I didn't want whoever was up there to know I was in the house. I was alone, and the idea of someone breaking in was enough to make my heart race faster. But at the same time, I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just a mistake, a noise that didn't mean anything. Maybe it was just an animal outside, a raccoon or a stray cat knocking things around outside. But no, this was definitely inside. The sounds were too close, too loud. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I slowly reached for the remote and clicked the TV off, not wanting to make any noise, and held my breath for a moment. The house was dead silent again. The kind of silence that makes everything seem much louder. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just stay in the basement, sitting there, waiting for something that might never come. I needed to see if someone was in the house, to make sure there wasn't an intruder. But I couldn't just rush upstairs without knowing what was happening. My heart was pounding, and I was shaking, but I told myself to stay calm. The last thing I wanted was to panic. I quietly stood up, my feet barely making a sound on the cold concrete floor. I slowly moved toward the door leading up to the rest of the house, careful not to make a sound. The door to the stairs was old, the wood creaking slightly under my fingers as I turned the knob. The handle was cold against my skin, sending a chill through me as I silently pulled the door open. The sounds had stopped. I paused, standing in the doorway for a moment, my ears straining to catch any hint of movement. Nothing. The house was eerily quiet. My pulse quickened, and I began to slowly walk up the stairs, my feet light on the steps, trying to make as little noise as possible. I could feel the hairs on my arms rising as I moved through the dark house. The stairs creaked under my weight, but I couldn't avoid that. I reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the kitchen. The door to the dining room was just ahead. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a nightlight that gave off a dim, yellowish light. The house smelled faintly of old wood, dust, and something else, a slight, musty odor that was common in houses that had stood for years. The dining room was just around the corner, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was about to face something I didn't want to see. I couldn't explain it, but my stomach was in knots. When I rounded the corner into the dining room, my eyes darted to the table first. It was sitting exactly where it should be, undisturbed. The chairs were neatly arranged around it, no sign of the chaos I had imagined. No overturned table, no broken chairs. There was nothing. The room looked exactly as it always did, unchanged, undisturbed. My eyes scanned the room again, looking for any sign of something, anything, that might indicate someone had been here. But nothing. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The front door was shut, locked as usual, with no sign that anyone had tried to force their way in. No windows were broken. I quickly checked all the other rooms. My parents' bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, all of them were empty. The house was as quiet as it always was when I was home alone. There was no sign of anyone being there. No one had broken in. No furniture had been knocked over. It was as if the noise I had heard hadn't even happened at all. But I knew I had heard it. I could still hear the echoes of the chairs scraping against the floor, the sound of stumbling footsteps, the clattering of the table as it was knocked over. The noise had been so real, so clear. I stood there for a long time, my mind racing, trying to process everything. My body still felt tense, my heart still hammering in my chest. I wasn't sure if I should be relieved or even more terrified. If there had been someone here, where had they gone? And why did it sound like they had been wrecking the dining room, only for everything to be perfectly fine now? I checked every window again, just to make sure, but everything was secure. I felt a strange sense of confusion, a disorienting mix of relief and fear. Something had definitely happened, but there was no evidence of anything. Nothing made sense. After what felt like an eternity of standing there, I finally started to relax, just a little. Maybe it had been some sort of trick of the mind, the house settling in a way that made it sound like furniture was being knocked over. Maybe there was a simple explanation I just couldn't see in that moment of panic. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back to bed anytime soon. Something had happened, something I couldn't explain. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it in my bones. Something was wrong. I locked all the doors, checked all the windows again, and finally returned to my room in the basement, making sure to turn on every light along the way. I sat in my room for hours, staring at the walls, waiting for the house to tell me what was going on. And it never did. The house stayed quiet, as it always did, but the memory of those noises stayed with me, echoing in my mind. I was 17 when we moved to a small town in rural northwestern Canada, in the Yukon. My mom, stepdad, and I relocated from a busy city to this quiet, isolated area, looking for a fresh start. The house we found was perfect. A large old place with a huge yard for bedrooms and plenty of space to stretch out. It was just the kind of place that felt welcoming at first, but it didn't take long for me to realize that there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. I decided to set up my bedroom in the basement, mostly because it was large and had enough space for all the stuff I'd collected over the years. The basement was huge, and I transformed it into my own personal hangout. My bed was placed in a small room directly beneath the upstairs living room. The rest of the basement was a massive open space, with one single light in the center, and on the far side was an unfinished area. The drywall hadn't been put up yet, and the fiberglass insulation hung down in some places, looking old and ratty. There was also a workbench in the corner, cluttered with old tools and bits of hardware that had been left behind by the previous owners. At night, when everything was quiet, I would sit down at my computer or watch TV. The basement would fall into darkness, with only that one light in the middle of the room illuminating everything. The unfinished area at the far end of the basement always seemed darker, and I could never shake the feeling that something was lurking there, hidden just beyond my sight. I wasn't sure what it was. It didn't feel dangerous, just unsettling. The kind of thing that makes you look over your shoulder without really understanding why. I spent a lot of time alone in that basement. I'd come home from school, work, or the few social events I went to, and I'd retreat to my space in the basement. Over time, the unease I felt seemed to grow, though it never really crossed over into fear. I'd hear small noises, things shifting in the dark, but nothing that was overtly threatening. But there was something that gnawed at the back of my mind. Then, one night, a few weeks after we moved in, something happened that made me start questioning my sanity. I was sitting on the couch in the basement, playing a game on my computer, when I heard a rustling sound coming from the corner of the room. It was quiet at first, almost like something small moving around. I froze listening. It wasn't a mouse or anything small like that. This was something bigger. I grabbed a flashlight and walked over to the source of the sound, feeling my heart race in my chest. I shone the light around, but the corner was empty. There was nothing there. The noise stopped. I turned the flashlight off and went back to bed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. That night, I woke up suddenly. It wasn't the noise that woke me, but the feeling of something tugging at my hair. It was light at first, like someone had pulled a single strand. I shot upright, my heart pounding in my chest. My bedroom door was open. I had clearly closed it before going to sleep. I jumped out of bed, flipping on all the lights and calling for my mom. She came running downstairs, and we searched the entire house. Every room, every closet, every window. Everything was locked. No one was there. My mom looked as confused as I felt. I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, my mom told me something that made my blood run cold. She'd been napping on the couch in the living room when she woke up to the sensation of someone pulling on her hair. She hadn't mentioned it to me, and I hadn't told her about what had happened to me. We were both rattled, and at that point, it was clear that something was wrong in the house. In an attempt to make myself feel safer, I decided to hang a curtain in the basement to separate my part of the room from the unfinished space. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of control, a way to block off that area I had always felt uneasy about. The curtain was long, and it hung down loosely, the bottom of it piling up a little on the floor. That night, I went to bed, still feeling uneasy but trying to ignore it. When I woke up the next morning, the curtain was open. I assumed I had left it open the night before when I had gone to use the microwave. I didn't think much of it. I got up, closed the curtain, and went about my day. But as night fell, that familiar feeling of unease returned. I was sitting on the couch again, watching TV, when I noticed the curtain moving. At first, I thought I might be imagining it, but when I looked again, the bottom of the curtain had been pulled back towards the unfinished area. I stood up, my stomach turning, and walked over to close it again. That night, I decided to sleep on the couch upstairs. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart racing again. Once again, I felt the sensation of something pulling at my hair, and it made my skin crawl. I immediately jumped up, turned on all the lights, and made myself a cup of coffee. I wasn't going back to sleep. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, my eyes wide open, listening to every creak of the house. The next day, I went downstairs to grab my backpack for school, and when I walked into the basement, I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. The curtain was open again. I asked my mom if she had moved it, but she said no. I didn't say anything else. I went to school, but when I got home, I found the curtain had been pulled off the rod and was lying in a heap on the floor. I put it back up, closed it, and went to take a shower. When I came out, the curtain was open again, and the living room light was off. The air around me felt thick, like something was pressing in from all sides. I felt a sudden wave of dread, and without thinking, I grabbed some salt from the kitchen and sprinkled a line across the top of the stairs. I wasn't sure why, but something inside me told me it might help. That night, I tried to sleep again, but the dread in the air made it impossible. The curtain was still closed, but when I checked the couch cushions, they were all on the floor, and the TV was on. I quickly turned it off, tried to make the couch up, and went to take another shower. When I came out, I saw the same thing. The curtain was open, and the lights were off. I closed the curtain again, and as I did, I heard a loud rattling noise coming from the bathroom. My heart was pounding in my chest as I ran upstairs, only to find that the bathroom light was off. My bedroom door was open too. I called my mom in a panic, and she, being the spiritual person she was, immediately reached out to someone from the local native band. They came over, and a woman performed a smudge ceremony in our house, burning sage and wafting it around each room. She told me that whatever was there didn't seem hostile, but was definitely unhappy. She assured me it wasn't something to fear, and for a brief moment, I felt a little better, like something was being cleared away. But that feeling didn't last long. That evening, when I was standing in the basement, the microwave turned on by itself. It was as if someone had pressed the buttons, and the hum of it filled the air. I walked over to the curtain and, without thinking, said out loud, "Whatever is in here, just stop." The microwave turned off. I turned to walk upstairs, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I felt something press against the back of the curtain. I didn't have to see it, I could feel it, and the sensation was enough to make me run out of that basement faster than I ever thought possible. My mom followed me, throwing salt around the house, screaming for whatever was in there to stop. I ended up moving my bedroom upstairs, trying to get as far away from the basement as possible. For a while, everything seemed normal again, but I would still get that uneasy feeling whenever I passed by the basement stairs. A few months passed without anything strange happening, but one night, as I was lying in bed, something made me look towards the mirror in the corner of the room. I didn't see anything at first, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I looked at the mirror, and nothing was there, but I could still see something shifting in the reflection. Something dark, something just out of sight. I stared at the ceiling, trying to ignore the feeling of something being close, something watching me. I had put glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling as a kid, and now, as I lay in bed, I saw them start to block out, one by one, like someone was standing at the head of my bed, blocking the light. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I lay there, wide-eyed, for what felt like hours, watching the stars disappear as the figure slowly moved closer, just beyond my view. By the time morning came, I had no idea how I had gotten through the night. A few weeks later, we moved to southern British Columbia, and I left that house behind. But even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about it. Something was in that house. It wasn't anything supernatural, but it was enough to make me question what was really going on behind those dark curtains in the basement. The night I saw the girl in the white dress started out just like any other night. It was a Friday, and my friend and I had spent the evening hanging out at a local diner. We were both 16, fresh into our junior licenses, and still learning how to navigate the world of driving without the supervision of our parents. As the clock ticked past 11, we realized we were pushing the limit of our curfew. Technically, we weren't supposed to be driving this late, but we both knew the back roads were a safer bet than any main road, especially since we didn't want to risk running into any cops who might pull us over for something as trivial as being out too late. So, we decided to take the back road home. The road we took wound its way through the countryside, with a farm on the left and dense woods on the right. The asphalt stretched out in front of us, lined by tall trees that seemed to cast long shadows in the low light of our headlights. The crickets chirped in the distance, and the occasional breeze rustled through the leaves. The place felt peaceful, quiet, safe almost. We were a few miles from the nearest town, and as we sped down the road, the world outside seemed to blur away. It was just us, two teenagers on the edge of freedom, trying to figure out how to make it through the night without anyone noticing we were still out. We came to a sharp left turn, one of those that feel like a hard bend in the road, where you have to slow down or risk driving off into the gravel. On the right side of the road, the woods gave way to a small yard that belonged to some house I didn't recognize. The house was just off to the side, barely visible from the road. The headlights swept over the yard as we made the turn, and that's when I saw it. For a split second, I swear I saw her. This girl, standing right in the middle of the yard. She was dressed in a plain white dress, and the way she stood there, motionless, against the backdrop of the dark night, gave me an unsettling feeling in my gut. The moment the light hit her, I felt a chill run through me, but I couldn't process what I had seen fast enough. I blinked, and she was gone. I turned to my friend. His eyes were wide, his hands frozen on the steering wheel. There was this look on his face, like he was trying to make sense of what he'd just seen too. And that's when he spoke. "You saw her too, right?" His voice was shaky, and I could hear the unease in it. I nodded, my mouth dry. The girl in the white dress. Without saying a word, he slammed on the brakes. The car jerked to a stop, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My breath caught in my throat as the headlights illuminated the yard again. The place where I had seen her was now completely empty. No girl, no dress, just an ordinary yard with grass and a few trees scattered around. Nothing that could have even remotely resembled a person. He slowly reversed the car, bringing the headlights back over the yard. Still nothing. It was just an empty space. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Was there a shadow, maybe? Something that had looked like a person, but wasn't? But there was no mistaking it. I had seen her. I knew what I had seen. And whatever it was, it didn't belong there. My friend glanced at me, his face pale, his lips pressed together in a tight line. There was no way to explain it. We both knew that much. The rest of the drive home was quiet. Too quiet. Neither of us said a word. My mind kept replaying the image of the girl in the white dress, but it didn't make sense. Why would someone be out there in the middle of nowhere, at that hour, alone? And why was she gone so quickly? It felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to have seen it, like something had been intentionally hidden from us. When we got to his house, we didn't talk about it. Neither of us mentioned it again. It wasn't until years later, when we bumped into each other again, that we finally spoke about that night. Neither of us had ever figured out what we saw. We didn't have answers, but we both agreed that whatever it wasn't something that could be explained away easily. That night stuck with me for a long time. But it wasn't the only time I would experience something that would shake my understanding of the world around me. A few years before the girl in the white dress, I had been on vacation with my mom and sister in St. Martin. We had rented a small villa, the kind that was tucked away in a quiet corner of the island. It was a nice place, cozy, with a view of the ocean. The whole trip was supposed to be a chance for us to unwind and relax. But one night, it turned into something I'll never forget. I was about 12 years old at the time. My sister and I had separate sleeping arrangements. She was on a pull-out couch in the living room, and I was sleeping in the bed with my mom. I couldn't fall asleep that night. The air was warm, the sound of the ocean faint in the background, but I couldn't settle down. I just kept tossing and turning, unable to get comfortable. So I opened my eyes. That was when I saw it. There, near the edge of the bed, was a shadow. A tall, dark figure. At first, I thought it might have been a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from something in the room. But no, this figure was solid, unmoving, and it felt like it was staring at me. The longer I stared, the more I realized I wasn't imagining it. There was a man, a dark figure, standing near my legs. I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel its presence. It was as if the air around me had thickened, and I was frozen, too afraid to move, to breathe. As I lay there, paralyzed, I tried to look away. But when I shifted my gaze, I saw another figure. This one was standing at the foot of the bed, large and heavy-set. The third figure was on the left side of the bed, hovering over my mom, its thin form casting an eerie shadow across her. My heart pounded in my chest, and my body felt cold with fear. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I just kept staring at them, hoping they would disappear, but they didn't. After what felt like an eternity, I mustered enough courage to reach over and turn on the lamp. The light flooded the room, and when I looked again, there was nothing there. The figures had vanished. The room was empty, just as it had been before. I was too scared to turn the light off again, so I left it on, trying to calm my racing heart. I eventually fell asleep, but the next morning, I couldn't shake the memory of those figures. When I told my mom about it, she didn't believe me. But my older sister, who had been sleeping on the couch, said that she had seen someone standing in the room too. She wasn't sure who it was, but she remembered feeling a presence that night. But that night in St. Martin wasn't the only strange experience I had. Years later, when I was a little older, I had to say goodbye to a beloved friend, my dog Mercer. He was a black lab, the kind of dog who was always getting into trouble. He'd tear up furniture, eat things he shouldn't, and generally make a mess of everything. But despite his bad habits, he was family. We loved him, and he loved us. He was our loyal companion through everything. Mercer's health had been declining for a while. The vet had diagnosed him with cancer, and the disease had ravaged his body. His energy was gone, and he couldn't even stand without help. We knew it was time. So, we made the decision to put him down. The vet was kind enough to come to our house so that Mercer could pass in the place he loved, surrounded by the people who cared for him. That evening, after everything was done, I was emotional. I went to the bathroom to gather myself and find a tissue. When I stepped back into the hallway, I saw Mercer. He was standing right outside the bathroom door, just as he used to do when he'd wait for me to come out. For a moment, I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and I jumped in surprise. There he was, standing there, looking at me with those familiar eyes. But then, just as quickly as I saw him, he was gone. He wasn't there anymore. I stood in the hallway, feeling the emptiness where he had just been. I didn't know what to think. Was it a hallucination? A trick of my tired mind? Or was it something else? Whatever it was, I never saw Mercer again after that night. It wasn't the kind of goodbye I had imagined, but it was the one I got. A quiet, fleeting moment of reassurance, maybe, that he was okay. But even now, when I think about it, I can't help but feel a lingering sadness. It was as if he was saying goodbye, and I was the one who couldn't let him go. Some things don't have explanations. Sometimes we see things we can't understand, things that don't fit into the neat boxes of logic or reason. But maybe, just maybe, it's okay not to have all the answers. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over everything in the late afternoon. It was the kind of day that felt like it might never end, where everything seemed to pause just long enough to let you breathe before it was time to move on to the next moment. I remember that day so clearly, the way the air was thick with the sense of summer still hanging around even though school had already started. I had gotten into trouble at school earlier in the day, kicked out for fighting. The boy had thrown my hat over the fence into the neighboring school, and I didn't care about the consequences. I just wanted to get it back. But I didn't know that the day was going to end up being so different from what I expected. It wasn't just my punishment I'd be facing that evening. After getting suspended, I wandered around the apartment for a while, trying to kill time before my dad came home from work. I didn't feel angry about the suspension, not exactly. More like a weird sense of detachment, like everything that happened at school felt like it belonged to someone else, someone I didn't even recognize. The truth was, I wasn't thinking much about the school or the fight anymore. Instead, my mind kept drifting to the old apartment building across the street. That building was a regular part of my life, but that day, it felt a little different. My brother's mom lived there. We didn't see each other often, but she was always kind. She would wave at me from her balcony sometimes, and there was this quiet understanding that she cared about me, even if I wasn't always around. I had no idea that when I looked out the window at her balcony that afternoon, I would be seeing her for the last time. I was standing at the window, staring out across the street, when I saw her. She was out on the balcony, just like always, leaning against the railing. The afternoon light caught the soft lines of her face, and even from a distance, I could see the faint smile she always wore when she saw me. It was a peaceful kind of smile, the kind that made you feel like everything was going to be okay, no matter what happened. I don't even know why, but without thinking, I waved at her. I was just a kid, and it felt natural to wave to someone you recognized. And to my surprise, she waved back. It wasn't a big gesture, just a small, gentle wave. But it felt like a moment frozen in time. I could almost feel her warmth through the glass of the window, like she was reaching out through the space between us. In that moment, everything felt right. I stood there for a few seconds, watching her, and I felt comforted by the simple connection. But just as I was about to turn away, I heard the sound of the front door opening. My dad was home. I turned around, already forgetting about the moment with my brother's mom, focused instead on the fact that my dad was walking in. I had forgotten I was suspended. He looked at me with his usual tired expression, like he hadn't even been gone for hours. But then he told me to sit down, his voice sounding just a little more serious than usual. I was confused. Why would he want me to sit down? Maybe I was in more trouble than I realized. I didn't even ask, I just obeyed. I went and sat on the couch, waiting for him to say whatever it was he needed to say. My brother came in too. He stood beside my dad, looking more tired than I remembered. He didn't say anything at first, just staring at the floor. I remember wondering why everyone seemed so quiet. It wasn't like the usual homecoming after a day apart, where we'd joke around and get dinner ready. This felt heavier, like something was hanging in the air that I couldn't grasp. Then my dad said it. "She passed away this morning," he said, his voice softer than I was used to. My brother's mom, the one I had just waved at from across the street, was gone. I stared at my dad, my mind trying to process what he said. For a moment, it felt like he couldn't possibly be talking about her. How could she be gone? How could she be dead? I had just seen her, waving from her balcony. It didn't make sense. She had waved back at me. That wasn't the kind of thing you did when you were dead. It wasn't possible. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at my dad, looking for some sign that he was joking. He wasn't. I looked at my brother, hoping to see the same confusion I felt, but all I saw was his face crumple. Tears started to fall down his cheeks, and I knew then that it was real. She was really gone. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't say anything about the wave. I didn't tell them I had just seen her. I didn't tell anyone that I'd seen her smile at me from across the street. It didn't seem like the right time, and besides, I knew what they would say. They would tell me that I'd just imagined it, that it was some trick of the light or a fleeting moment that my mind had held onto for too long. But I couldn't shake it. The memory of her wave was burned into my mind. It stayed with me for hours, and I kept thinking about it, about how real it had felt, about how alive she seemed in that moment. I wasn't scared. I wasn't frightened by the idea that I had seen her when she was already gone. It wasn't like she was haunting me or trying to send me a message. It felt like a connection, pure and simple. The kind of thing that was meant to be, a final moment before the world changed forever. As the hours passed, the sadness started to sink in. My brother cried for a long time, and I didn't know what to do for him. We sat there together, and I realized that I didn't know how to help him deal with something like this. It was the first time I'd ever seen him break down like that. I didn't cry, though. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't understand it fully, or maybe I was too young to process the weight of loss. But I felt it. I felt the gravity of what had happened, the sudden absence of someone who had always been there in the background, and it left me feeling hollow, like a piece of me had gone missing. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the balcony, about my brother's mom standing there, waving at me. She had seemed so alive in that moment, so full of life. It was like she had known that we wouldn't see each other again, that was the last time we would have any kind of moment together. Maybe she had felt it too, in some way that I couldn't understand. The next morning, things were different. My dad and brother were both quieter than usual, and I could tell they were trying to figure out how to go on. The world had changed overnight, and there was no going back. I didn't know what to say to anyone. I didn't know how to fix things, how to make the sadness go away. All I had left were the memories, the little moments like the wave from across the street that now felt more important than anything else. It took me a long time to fully understand what had happened, to understand that life could change so suddenly, that people we loved could be here one moment and gone the next. But in the years that followed, I carried that moment with me. I carried the memory of her wave, the quiet kindness she had shown me, even when I didn't fully understand what it meant. It became one of those rare memories that stays with you forever, tucked away in the back of your mind, where it's always there when you need it. And every time I think of her, I smile, remembering that simple moment. It wasn't just a wave. It was a final goodbye, one that I didn't know I needed until it was too late. But now, it was mine to keep forever. We were both about 9 and 11 years old when this happened, my stepsister and I. Growing up in rural Ontario, we'd spend a lot of time in the woods, exploring, playing, and just losing ourselves in the sprawling forests that stretched out around our house. That day, though, was different. We were feeling particularly adventurous, so we decided to wander farther from the house than usual. It wasn't like we were trying to be reckless. We just liked to explore, and the woods had always felt safe, familiar, and endless. We knew this area well. The valley we were heading into wasn't easy to get to, and no one really went there unless they had a reason. It was full of huge, steep hills and ravines, places where you couldn't just stroll up or down without a real effort. It wasn't the kind of spot people would just wander into by accident. There were very few houses that backed onto that piece of land, and those houses were a good distance away. Most people stayed to the trails closer to the roads, but we liked to get off the beaten path, to see what lay beyond where everyone else went. On this day, the sun was high, the forest was warm, and the birds were out. It was a typical summer afternoon. We were chatting as we wandered deeper, laughing and picking at random plants, as kids do. We weren't really paying attention to our surroundings in the way we should have been. We were so wrapped up in our own little world, the kind of carefree thing kids do when they feel like they own the entire place, like the whole forest is just theirs to explore. Then, out of nowhere, there was a figure. It was like he just appeared in front of us, standing on the narrow dirt patch we'd been walking along. He was maybe 3 feet away, and the shock of seeing him stopped us both dead in our tracks. We hadn't heard him approach, hadn't seen any movement before he was just there. The man was tall, but not overly so, and his clothes were what threw us off the most. He was wearing a cowboy hat, one of those wide-brimmed ones, and a suede vest that looked like something out of an old Western film. His clothes were dusty, like he had been out in the wild for a long time. The first thing we noticed was how out of place he was. It wasn't like we were in some touristy area or near a place where people would dress up like that for fun. We were deep in the forest, miles away from any road or trail that people usually followed. No one just wandered into this area, especially not someone dressed like that. He didn't acknowledge us at all. No nod, no wave, no smile. He didn't even seem to look at us. He just walked right past, heading down the hill, his footsteps steady and sure, like he was going somewhere with a purpose. For a moment, my stepsister and I just stood there, not sure what to make of it. It wasn't normal for someone to be that close to us, and it wasn't normal for them to just ignore us either. If it were someone from around the area, we would have at least exchanged a few words. But this guy didn't even glance in our direction. We watched him walk away, trying to make sense of it. He was heading downhill, and we had a good view of the path he was on. The terrain around us was tricky, with a lot of steep slopes and thick brush, so there weren't a lot of places for him to hide. We expected to see him keep walking down, get farther and farther away, until he disappeared from our sight like any normal person would. But that's not what happened. As we stood there watching, he just vanished. He didn't disappear into the trees, didn't duck behind a rock, didn't turn a corner. He simply wasn't there anymore. We had been watching the path, and 1 second he was there, and the next second he was gone, as though he had never been there at all. It wasn't like we had taken our eyes off him or gotten distracted. We had a clear view of the area, and there was no way for someone to just vanish like that. At first, we just shrugged it off. We were kids, and kids are good at brushing off strange things when they don't know what to make of them. We probably chalked it up to him being someone from a nearby farm or just a random person wandering around. After all, it wasn't unheard of for people to take walks through the woods out there, even if it was a bit unusual for them to be dressed like that. So we continued playing. We explored more of the area, climbed on rocks, checked out a small creek we found, and generally had a good time. But that image of the man, dressed like something out of another time, kept creeping into the back of my mind. It wasn't until a few years later, when I was old enough to start reflecting on that day with a bit more clarity, that I realized how strange it really was. How had he gotten there? Why was he wearing those clothes, so out of place in this day and age? Why hadn't he said anything, not even looked at us? And most importantly, how had he disappeared like that, without a trace? It started to seem less like an innocent encounter and more like something odd. Something that didn't quite fit with the world we knew. I talked to my stepsister about it a few years later. We were both teenagers by then, and the memory of that strange man had stayed with both of us, gnawing at us from time to time. We both had the same questions. How had he just walked away from us and vanished? It didn't make any sense. People don't just disappear in the woods like that. We even asked our parents if they knew anyone who dressed like that, or if they knew of any old stories about a cowboy-like figure wandering the woods around our area. But they just looked at us like we were crazy. There was nothing about that man that fit with what we knew about the world. Looking back now, I don't know what to make of it. I can't say I believe it was some kind of ghost or supernatural entity. I'm not someone who buys into that kind of thing. But I also know that what we saw that day wasn't ordinary. Maybe he was just someone with a weird sense of style, someone from a family who had lived out there for generations and didn't really care what others thought. But that doesn't explain how he vanished without a trace, not when there were no other paths for him to take, and no way for him to just blend into the woods without being noticed. All I know for sure is that I'll never forget the way he looked, the way he walked right past us without a word, and the way he disappeared. I don't know if we encountered someone from another time, if he was lost, or if we were just seeing things. But whatever it was, it remains one of the strangest and most inexplicable moments of my life. I was about 13 when we moved into my mom's old house. It wasn't a huge house, but it had its quirks. It was an old place, definitely seen better days. The attic, though, was something else. It had been mostly finished into a living space, but there were still parts of it that were untouched, incomplete. These parts were lined with little doors, small, almost hidden doors that always felt off, like they were just waiting for something to come through them. I couldn't even look at them for too long without getting the chills. I was given the attic as my bedroom, probably because no one else wanted to deal with it. The house itself had its strange moments, but the attic? That was a different world entirely. At first, it didn't feel too bad. I had a futon right up against the banister, which overlooked the kitchen below. I could hear the hum of the house from there, the sounds of things shifting and creaking, but it wasn't too bad. My little sister slept up there with me at first, sharing the space with me, but after the first incident, she moved to her own room. She couldn't sleep up there anymore. Neither could I. The first Christmas we spent in that house is when everything started to feel different. It was Christmas Eve, the first one in that house. My sister and I were curled up on the futon, and the dogs Zoe, Layla, Spice, and Haas were sprawled around us. We were just watching TV, winding down for the night. Layla, the Doberman, was laying at the foot of the futon while the puppies, Zoe, Haas, and Spice, were at the top of the bed. Layla had a habit of growling at the attic door, the one that was practically touching the foot of my bed. It was something she did every night, between 9 and 10 p.m., so we didn't think much of it. We'd just tell her to stop and go back to whatever we were doing. But that night, she didn't stop. She just kept growling, a low, steady growl that sent a cold shiver through the air. We didn't really think about it at first, but then the growl turned into something else. It was like she was fixated on whatever was on the other side of that door. It wasn't like the usual growling. It was like she was watching something that made her uncomfortable, something she knew shouldn't be there. A few minutes later, my mom came upstairs. She poked her head through the door from the kitchen and told us to stop stomping around. We looked at her, confused. We hadn't moved, and neither had the dogs. We were just watching TV. We told her we hadn't been running around, and she left, but it felt off. Layla was still staring at the door, her growling getting worse. A little while later, my mom came back upstairs, saying we were being too noisy again, that we needed to go to bed. I told her it was just me and Layla awake, and everyone else was asleep. She just said, "Oh," and left again. Eventually, I fell asleep, though I had a hard time. Layla was still on edge, and I could feel the weight of whatever it was that she was staring at. I remember waking up the next morning to the excitement of Christmas, but there was something else on my mind, something I couldn't shake. As we opened presents, my mom told us that she had come upstairs 3 more times that night, each time to tell us to stop making noise and go to bed. But here's the thing, she told me that it was only me and Layla awake, but the other times, everyone else, except for Layla, was completely asleep. Layla, though, had been staring at the attic doors the whole time, growling at something that wasn't there, something that none of us could see. My mom also mentioned that she'd heard stomping, like a large man in boots, walking back and forth or running through the house. She thought it was us, but none of us had moved. That wasn't the only strange thing. We had already figured out that there were 2 main entities in the house. There was the little boy who ran between my sister's room and the living room, turning radios and TVs on and off, making noise in the middle of the night. We could never really see him, but we knew he was there. Then there was the older, larger man. He stayed up in my room, and I could feel him every night. I'd wake up and feel him standing over me, or sometimes it felt like he was sitting on top of me, pressing me down into the futon. Layla would growl at him every night, and it got to the point where we just accepted it. It was part of life in that house. A year later, around the next Christmas, my mom and her husband were finally ready to leave that house after living there for 8 years. My sister had moved out by then, and I had been out of there for 6 years, so when I visited, I slept up in the attic again. There was no couch in the living room, so the attic was the only real place for me to sleep. My boyfriend and I would visit often, and that Christmas, he stayed at his place while my nephew stayed with his dad, so I was alone in the house for most of it. My mom sent Haas upstairs to keep me warm while I slept, since the attic was cold and didn't have proper insulation. The room was freezing, especially in the winter months, and it was tough to get any sleep up there. I was on the futon again, lying in the same spot, in the corner where I used to wake up to the feeling of the man standing over me. It was still terrifying, sleeping alone in that room. At some point during the night, I was on Skype with my boyfriend. He had just gotten off the call, and Haas was tired of hearing me talk, so he went down to the bottom of the stairs and lay by the door. I didn't think much of it until I started hearing scratching sounds. It sounded like Haas's nails coming up the stairs, but when I looked, he wasn't there. The noise stopped halfway up the stairs, which was odd. I figured he must have heard something and stopped to listen. Then, after a while, the scratching noise went back down the stairs, and I didn't think much of it. But then it happened again. The scratching came back up the stairs, and this time, I didn't want Haas to just be standing on the stairs all night, so I called out to him, asking if he was okay. The noise stopped. But then, to my surprise, Haas actually came up the stairs, hopping the last few steps like he was in a hurry. That wasn't like him at all, and it made me uncomfortable. I didn't know what to make of it. I started feeling more uneasy, like there was something else on the stairs, something that was spooking my dog. I asked my boyfriend to stay on the phone with me longer, but he didn't believe in any of that stuff. He just laughed it off, but I could tell I was getting scared. As soon as we hung up, the scratching started again, but this time it was faster, almost like someone was rushing up the stairs. I was terrified. I could hear it coming closer, and I knew something wasn't right. I looked through the slats in the banister to see what was making the noise, and that's when I saw it. There was this shadow, dark as night, crawling up the stairs on all fours. It was like a person, but not. It looked unnatural wrong. Its head turned and locked eyes with me, and then, just as quickly, it backed down the stairs, retreating into the darkness. I freaked out. I started texting my boyfriend, telling him what had happened. I sent him videos and pictures, trying to prove to him that I wasn't crazy, but he didn't believe me. That's when it happened again. The scratching started up the stairs, louder this time. I was recording on my phone, trying to get evidence, but the steps came up so fast that I barely got a good shot. This time, Haas was watching, and when the shadow came close to the foot of the futon, he snapped at the air where it had been. That's when it screeched, this horrible screech, so quiet, yet so piercing. It rushed back down the stairs, and didn't come back up. I don't know how, but I managed to fall asleep after that. Haas didn't move. He kept staring at the stairs all night. I woke up the next morning, and everything seemed normal, like nothing had happened. But I knew what I saw, and I knew what I heard. Whatever it wasn't human. That was the last time I ever stayed in that attic, and after that, my boyfriend became a believer. He had heard the noises, and he could no longer deny that something strange had happened. We never talked about it much, but whenever I passed that house, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly empty. It was still waiting, still holding on to whatever it was that had been there all those years. I had to be at work at 5 in the morning, which meant I had to be up by at least 3:30 a.m. I'm not one to skip out on breakfast, and I can't stand the thought of leaving the house without a shower. It's just part of my routine. So despite being groggy from not enough sleep, I dragged myself out of bed that morning in our old house. The floorboards creaked loudly as I walked down the hallway, the same familiar sound that had always been there. The house had that old lived-in feel, wooden floors that always seemed to groan under your weight, creaking as you moved, especially down that long hallway that ran from my room to the kitchen and dining area. I'd lived in that house my whole life, and I knew every inch of it. My brother, who always stayed up late on weekends playing games or watching TV, used to swear that he heard footsteps walking down the hall when everyone else was asleep. He wasn't scared, not exactly, but he'd say it felt like something was walking around. I used to dismiss his stories. After all, the house was old. The sounds of old wood settling, the creaks, the shifts, it was all natural. Nothing to get worked up over, right? I'd always been a skeptic when it came to that stuff. That was until that morning. I'll never forget it. I shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, and made myself a bowl of cereal. I sat down at the dining table, facing the sliding glass door that led out to our patio. The blinds on the door were those thick plastic ones, covering the whole window. They were turned so that the slats were closed, blocking any view from outside. It was still dark outside, and everything felt quiet, almost too quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the AC unit that always seemed to run at odd times. I was eating my cereal when it happened. At first, I didn't even notice it, my mind still foggy from the early wake-up. But as I took another bite, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The blind closest to the base of the window swung out. It wasn't a gentle sway like you'd expect if there was a draft. It shot out about a foot or so from the base, and then snapped back into position. No sound, no sway from the rest of the blinds. Just that one blind moving like something had physically pulled it. I froze, staring at it, chewing slowly. Maybe it was just my imagination. I glanced over at the HVAC unit on the wall. Was the AC kicking on? No, it wasn't that. The air coming from the vents was steady, but not enough to make a plastic blind do something like that. I watched it for a moment, waiting to see if it would happen again. The plastic slats remained still. Then, a moment later, the HVAC kicked on, and the soft whir of the fan filled the space. I didn't think much of it at first, but then the thought crept in. Could the air pressure from the system have moved the blind like that? I got up, walked over to the sliding glass door, and bumped the blinds to see if I could make them move again. When I tapped them, they swung out and then bumped against the glass, swaying back and forth before coming to rest. I couldn't make it happen like the first time. That was strange. How could one blind move and return to its position without hitting the glass at all? The air conditioner wasn't the cause. It hadn't even kicked on when it happened. I crouched down, checking around the seals of the sliding door, running my fingers along the edges where the frame met the glass. I even checked the aluminum trim, hoping to feel a draft. But there was nothing, not even a cool breeze from outside. It was still early, too early for the wind to be strong, and it had been calm all night. It was just a regular morning, or so I thought. I stood there, staring at the blinds for what felt like a long time. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled slightly, but I tried to shake it off. I even walked back to my seat at the table and turned around, keeping an eye on the blinds. Nothing happened for a while. But then, just as I was about to dismiss it as a fluke, the weirdest thing happened. The blind swung out again. This time, I was wide awake, fully alert, and watching. My cereal bowl sat forgotten in front of me. The blind moved the same way, swinging out, not even brushing the glass. It didn't feel like a draft or anything natural. It just moved. And then, just as before, it returned to its resting position. No sound, no other movement. Just that single swing. I felt a chill wash over me, but I didn't want to believe it. I had to find an explanation. So I stood up again and pushed the blinds, trying to replicate the movement. But it never worked the same way again. Every time I bumped them, they made a sound as they hit the glass, swaying back and forth before coming to a stop. I even checked the door again, inspecting everything, feeling a little ridiculous at this point. But there was no explanation. No wind, no drafts, no nothing. Just the plastic blinds moving in a way that didn't make sense. It was at that point, when I realized there was no way to explain what I had just seen, that I felt the weight of something strange settle in. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room anymore. The air felt heavier, thicker somehow, as though something was watching me. My breath quickened, and my heart rate picked up. I had always believed in the paranormal, but I never expected something like this to happen to me. I sat there at the table for a few more moments, my mind racing. It was one of those things that you try to explain away, but there was no explanation. Nothing I could point to and say, "Oh, that's what caused it." My mind kept going back to the sound, the creaking of the floorboards in the hallway outside. My brother always swore that he heard footsteps there, late at night when he stayed up gaming. I had always brushed it off, telling myself it was just the house settling, that the creaks were natural, that it was all just noise. But now, after that morning, after the blinds, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe my brother wasn't imagining things. I called out toward the door. "Do that again," I said, pointing at it, hoping for some sort of confirmation, some sign that I wasn't losing my mind. But nothing happened. The blinds remained still. The house was quiet again, but that feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me like a heavy presence in the room. I sat there for a few minutes longer, feeling absurdly small in that vast, creaking house. The minutes dragged on, and I couldn't bring myself to move. I could still hear the occasional creak of the floorboards down the hallway. It wasn't much, just the sound of the house shifting, but it made me think of my brother's stories again. The HVAC clicked off, and the silence in the house felt louder than ever. I took a deep breath, trying to settle myself. But I knew one thing for sure. Something in that house was different now. Something had happened that I couldn't explain, and no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't make it go away. The rest of the morning was uneventful. I finished my cereal, got dressed, and went to work like normal. But as I walked out the door, I couldn't shake that feeling. Every time I walked down that hall, I was hyper-aware of the creaks beneath my feet. Every sound seemed louder, more significant. Even the wind outside seemed to carry an unfamiliar chill. From that day on, the house never felt quite the same. The sounds in the hallway, the creaks in the floorboards, they were no longer just the house settling. They felt intentional, like something was waiting in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment. And every time I walked down that hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following just behind me. Maybe my brother wasn't imagining things after all. It was a typical September afternoon in southwest Georgia, hot and steamy with the air thick and suffocating. The sun beat down from a cloudless sky, and everything around me felt like it was slowly baking under the pressure of the oppressive heat. I remember it so clearly, the way the trees barely stirred, the air dry as if the earth itself was exhaling through the leaves. My father, always the practical one, casually suggested I hunt the old railroad bed near the river bottoms. The area had always been one of my favorites. The river bottoms were familiar, quiet, and the old railroad bed offered easy access through shaded oaks, with nothing but loose gravel and old, rusted metal for company. The land was almost always silent in those places, but there was something comforting about it. Besides, the heat was unbearable, and the thick canopy of oak trees provided some respite from the sun. I was only 12 at the time, just starting to really get into bow hunting for white-tailed deer. I wasn't some rookie, though. Since I could walk, I'd been in the woods with my father, and by this time, I had spent 2 full years hunting alone. I had learned to identify the sounds of the forest, the chirps of birds, the rustling of squirrels in the underbrush, the distant calls of other animals. Each sound had its own signature, a unique fingerprint. I could tell when a deer was nearby, just from the way the leaves cracked underfoot. The silence of the woods on this particular day, though, was different, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The walk to my tree stand was easy enough, about a 3/4 mile hike down the old railroad bed through the thick woods. The trees, with their long, twisting roots and thick trunks, cast long shadows over the path. The ground was covered with leaves, making a soft, nearly silent carpet underfoot. The air was thick and still. It was hot, but there was this moment of calm in the woods. No breeze, no movement. The type of silence that seemed almost unnatural. I climbed up into the stand and settled in, trying to find a comfortable spot on the wooden seat. The heat was stifling, but the trees provided some relief. I remember how the light filtered through the canopy above me, creating a dappled pattern of shadows on the ground. Everything seemed to stand still. For the first hour, I watched the woods, trying to stay alert for any signs of movement. But nothing. The birds that usually filled the air with their constant chatter were nowhere to be heard. Not even the squirrels were scampering around in the trees. It was like the entire forest had just gone quiet. That was the first thing that struck me as odd. Every time I'd hunted in this area before, the forest had been alive with sound. But today, it was almost like I was the only living thing there. Even the normal sounds of the woods seemed muted. I sat there for a while longer, trying to shake off the unease that was creeping up on me. It wasn't until a couple of hours later, when the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, that I began to notice the first signs of life, deer. A couple of yearlings, and some does appeared on the far side of the railroad bed. They moved with purpose, weaving through the trees, their heads held low, and their ears flicking constantly. They weren't acting like normal, calm deer. They were on edge, clearly aware of something. Maybe they smelled me, or maybe it was the wind. Either way, they weren't sticking around. They moved quickly, disappearing into the woods. I took note of the way they acted. Their behavior wasn't normal, not like the deer I'd seen in the past. They were skittish, and if they were uneasy, there had to be a reason for it. The woods weren't just quiet anymore. There was something else at play, something beneath the surface. I figured it was time to head out. The sun was starting to set, and I knew it would be too dark to navigate the woods safely soon. I left my tree stand, moving quietly along the railroad bed, retracing the path I'd walked earlier. The stillness of the woods seemed to hang in the air, making every step feel heavier. The temperature had dropped a little, but the air was still thick with humidity. I remember hearing my boots crunching on the gravel and feeling the sweat running down my back, but it was oddly comforting, familiar. But then, about 100 yards down the path, I heard something. It was the sound of metal scraping against metal, sharp, grating, like someone was dragging something heavy across the old railroad track. I froze, my heart rate picking up. The sound echoed through the woods. It was loud, too loud, and in that instant, the reality of the woods being so quiet suddenly hit me in a way it hadn't before. The forest hadn't been quiet. It had been holding its breath. I quickly grabbed for my flashlight, switching it on, but as I did, the beam flickered and died. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I cursed under my breath, flicking the flashlight again, but it stayed dark. A sudden sense of urgency hit me. I picked up the pace, walking faster now, trying to make my way back to the Jeep. But the further I walked, the more the sound persisted, scraping metal, like the screech of old train wheels grinding on tracks. I reached the next bend in the railroad bed, and as I did, the sound of metal on metal stopped abruptly. But in its place, there was something worse. A light. A powerful light shot across the rail bed from my right to my left. It was a flash, like a searchlight or a bright spotlight sweeping through the woods, momentarily blinding me. My heart thudded in my chest, and I stood there frozen, for what felt like forever, trying to comprehend what was happening. There was no train on these tracks. The railroad bed had been abandoned for over 100 years. The thought of a passing train was impossible. Yet I had just experienced the unmistakable flash of a light like a train passing through. But there was nothing there. My hands were trembling as I managed to get the flashlight working again. I took a few deep breaths and moved forward, more cautiously now, trying to shake the creeping feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. But as I rounded the bend, everything hit me like a ton of bricks. That's when I realized what had just happened. The railroad tracks hadn't seen a train in over a century. The last trains on those tracks had carried Union prisoners of war to the infamous Andersonville prison, just a few miles away. But what bothered me was that I wasn't hearing things. I wasn't imagining this. The sound, the light, it was all too real, too tangible. I didn't waste another second. I started walking faster, almost running, and within minutes, I was back at the Jeep panting, my heart racing in my chest. I didn't say anything to my father that night. I didn't want to. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. But my father knew something was off. He could see it in my face when I climbed into the Jeep. He kept asking me what had happened, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I didn't want anyone to think I had imagined it or overreacted. I couldn't explain what had happened, what I had experienced, so I kept it to myself. But my father knew something had shaken me. He didn't press the issue, though. Not until a few days later, when we were riding back home. He asked again. He said that he had sent me down to that spot because my uncle had hunted there before. And when my uncle came back, he had been shaken up too. That was when I found out the rest of the story. My uncle had been walking the same railroad bed when he heard a voice, something like a boy, asking his father where they were going. The father's response was something like, "I don't know." But when my uncle looked around, there was no one there. He was alone. My father didn't elaborate, but I could tell by the look on his face that there was something more to the story. I asked him when the last time a train had come down that line, and he said it had to have been sometime in the late 1800s. That's when he told me about the trains that had carried Union prisoners to Andersonville Prison during the Civil War. I was speechless. It was a lot to process. I went back to the railroad bed one last time, only to return an old rail spike I had found near the tracks. After that, I didn't return. I couldn't. Something had changed in me that day. There were things in this world that couldn't be explained. After 15 years, I still think about it. I still feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when I remember the sound of metal scraping against metal, the flash of light, the way the air had felt in the woods. Something in that moment had shown me there are forces beyond my control, beyond what I can understand. And I have learned to respect that, even if I can't explain it. When my mom was pregnant with my older brother, she started having trouble sleeping. She wasn't sure what it was at first, just the usual discomfort of being pregnant, she thought. But over time, it became something more, something she couldn't shake. She would wake up in the middle of the night, unable to get back to sleep, her mind racing. The strange thing was, she wasn't waking up for any obvious reason. There were no nightmares, no discomfort from the pregnancy itself, but still, she couldn't sleep. At first, it was just a feeling, a nagging sensation, like something was off. She started hearing things, small noises in the house that didn't seem to belong. At night, while everyone else slept, she'd lie there in the dark, straining her ears, trying to figure out what it was. At first, she told herself it was just the wind or the house settling. After all, we lived out in the country, and in the country, houses creak. There are all kinds of sounds, rustling leaves, animals rustling around in the bushes. But then, the noise became more distinct. It wasn't just random noises anymore. It was a sound that made her skin crawl. A baby crying. It wasn't like anything she'd ever heard before. It was faint at first, almost like it was coming from far away. But as the nights passed, the sound grew clearer, sharper, more pronounced. She would lay there, wide awake, her heart pounding, listening to the sound of a baby crying in the distance. It wasn't a soft cry, like a baby just waking up. It was more desperate, like the cry of a baby in distress. She started to get paranoid. Every night, the crying was louder, closer. She couldn't sleep at all. It was like it was right outside the house. But every time she went to check, there was nothing. My dad would reassure her, telling her it was probably some animal, maybe a fox or raccoons, anything other than what she thought. Animals can make all sorts of sounds, weird cries that could be mistaken for a baby crying. He told her to relax, that it wasn't anything to worry about. But my mom couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The cry of the baby was too real, too vivid in her mind. She was sure of it now. It wasn't her imagination. One night, she couldn't take it anymore. She woke up my dad and asked him to check around the house. She was so sure she wasn't imagining it. He reluctantly got up, probably hoping this was all just some crazy pregnancy-induced paranoia. He checked the yard, the woods, the barn, but didn't find anything. He didn't hear the crying either. All was quiet still. No foxes, no raccoons, no signs of anything that could explain it. But my mom wasn't satisfied. She couldn't sleep, couldn't rest. Every night, it was the same. The baby crying in the distance. The nights were endless. My dad could see how badly it was affecting her. She was exhausted, her nerves shot, her pregnancy taking its toll. So, he started asking around. At first, he didn't know what else to do. He wasn't one for believing in local legends or rumors, but one of his friends from work, someone who grew up in the area, told him something that made his blood run cold. The friend told him that the house we were living in had a history. It wasn't much of a house when we moved in, just an old place in the middle of nowhere, tucked away between fields and woods. The land was cheap, and my parents thought it would be a great place to start our family. But this friend told my dad about the cellar. Apparently, the old owner of the house, the one who built it, had a dark secret. The man had kids, several of them, and rumors were that he used to lock them in the cellar. The cellar wasn't really a cellar like you'd think. It was more of a crawl space under the house, hidden under the floorboards, and barely big enough to fit a child. The kids were locked down there as punishment, isolated, ignored. My dad didn't believe it. He thought it was just some small-town gossip. People around here love telling stories, especially about old houses. He didn't want to bring it up to my mom, didn't want to scare her more than she already was. But as the nights passed, the crying continued, getting worse. My mom couldn't sleep, couldn't function. She was on edge all the time, pacing around the house, eyes wide with exhaustion. My dad knew he had to do something. He had to figure out what was going on, even if it meant confronting whatever rumors there were about the house. So one evening, after yet another sleepless night, he decided to start searching the house. It wasn't like he had any real clue what he was looking for, but he figured he had to start somewhere. The first place he checked was the basement. We didn't have much in the way of storage, just some old boxes that no one ever bothered to look through. But there was nothing. No hidden door, no crawl space. Just old stuff that didn't mean anything. Then he started checking the living room. The floors were solid, nothing out of the ordinary. But as he walked across the room, his foot hit something. A small, barely noticeable bump in the floor. He knelt down and traced his fingers across the floorboards. That's when he found it, a small, square latch in the floor. It was cleverly hidden, blending in with the wood. It didn't look like much, just a small panel. But it was definitely something. It had a latch, one that could be opened with a little effort. My dad stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to do. He'd heard the rumors, and now, here it was, the thing that could possibly explain everything. He swallowed hard and opened the latch. Inside, the crawl space was just as creepy as the rumors suggested. The space was small, cramped, with dirt flooring and dust everywhere. The air was stale, thick with the smell of age and neglect. But the worst part was what he found scattered around, children's toys. Old, forgotten toys that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. A broken doll, a small wooden toy car, a half-rusted tin soldier. They were all lying there in the dirt, just abandoned. The sight made his stomach turn. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the toys. He didn't want to believe it, but everything lined up. The crying, the toys, the rumors about the previous owner. It all fit. My dad didn't stick around in the crawl space for long. He quickly closed the latch and covered it back up, not wanting to deal with whatever that place meant. But one thing was certain. After that night, my mom never heard the crying again. She slept soundly for the first time in weeks, and my dad never spoke about the crawl space to anyone, not even to her. He didn't want to make it worse. From that point on, the house felt different. The air seemed less heavy, less haunted. My mom was able to sleep again, and the strange crying never returned. My dad never told her the full story, and I think she preferred it that way. There was no need to bring it up again. Sometimes, I wonder what happened in that crawl space, what kind of history that house really had. But whatever it was buried under the floor, locked away, never to be spoken of again. A couple of weeks ago, I was riding along with my friend while he did Postmates deliveries. He's been doing it for a while now, and sometimes when I'm bored, I'll hop in the car with him to keep him company. It's not a glamorous job, but it's easy money for him and gives us time to hang out, drive around the city, and people watch. It was a Thursday night, around 8 p.m., still light outside, that soft dusky blue tint starting to settle in over everything. The air had that weird in-between feeling where it's not quite warm and not quite cold, just kind of hanging there. We'd already done maybe 4 or 5 deliveries that night, mostly quick stuff, nothing too far out of the way. Most of the people didn't even want to come to the door. They just wanted the food left at their doorstep, no contact. Pretty normal these days. We got another ping to go to some apartment complex on the edge of downtown. Not one I recognized, but I figured it wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary. The building looked pretty average from the outside. Beige stucco, standard rectangular structure, a little worn down but not gross. There were some weeds pushing through the cracks in the sidewalk, and one of the metal letters that made up the name of the complex was missing from the sign at the entrance. I think it was supposed to say Wellington Grove, but it just said Welly__Grove. We pulled into the narrow parking lot, found a spot that didn't look like it was reserved, and made our way to the front door. The unit number we needed was on the second floor, and there was one elevator to the left of the lobby, beside the wall of old mailboxes. You could tell just by the smell that the building had been around for a while, kind of musty, like old carpet, and something faintly chemical, like cleaning spray that didn't really help anymore. Right before we got to the elevator, this woman came out of the stairwell, heading toward the front door. She was in her late 20s, or maybe early 30s. Long black hair tied back, pale skin kind of thin, wearing a gray hoodie and sweatpants. She had this little dog with her, one of those fluffy white ones that looked like they were bred to sit in a handbag. The dog looked up at us and wagged its tail. Cute thing. I gave a little wave, just out of habit more than anything, kind of a hey, I see you, just being polite sort of thing. She didn't smile, didn't wave back, just looked at me, flat expression, like I hadn't done anything at all. No eye roll, no frown, just nothing. That kind of made me uncomfortable for a second, but I shrugged it off. Some people are just like that. She could have been tired, or having a bad day, or maybe just one of those people who don't really acknowledge strangers. I didn't take it personally. We stepped into the elevator. It was small and slow, one of those older models that hum and groan the whole ride. There was a faded certificate framed above the buttons, and I remember thinking how long it had probably been since anyone had checked if it still passed inspection. It smelled like old gum and someone's leftover takeout. The ride to the second floor didn't take long. We walked down the hallway, which had that kind of beige-brown carpet you see in cheap hotels. The lights were yellow and a little dim, flickering slightly in places. The walls were painted an off-white color and had little scratches and smudges near the baseboards. Doors all looked the same, dark brown with peepholes and small, rectangular number plates screwed into the wood. We found the unit, dropped off the bag of food on the doormat, took a picture for proof, and turned around to head back the way we came. That's when we saw her again. Same woman, same hoodie, same dog. She was walking toward us down the hallway from the direction we'd just come, except we'd just seen her downstairs a minute ago. There wasn't enough time for her to have taken the stairs and beat us up there. And the elevator had only gone up once. As far as we knew, there was no one else on it with us. I looked at my friend, and he looked at me, and we both had the same confused look on our faces. We didn't say anything out loud, but the weirdness hung between us. She walked by without saying a word, same blank expression as before. Her dog glanced up again, but didn't bark or act weird. She turned left down a small hallway, just past a fire extinguisher case, and disappeared around the corner. We stood there for a second, trying to figure out if there was a second elevator, or maybe another stairwell we hadn't seen before. It was a weird layout, kind of like a U-shape, with little turns and dead ends, so we figured she might have gone down a second set of stairs. We decided to follow the path she took, not because we were being nosy, but because we needed to get down anyway and didn't feel like waiting for the slow-ass elevator again. We figured we'd find stairs at the end of the hall or something. We didn't. We turned the corner she did, and immediately hit a dead end. Just a brick wall with a dusty window that faced an alley out back. No door, no stairs, not even a maintenance closet. It didn't make any sense. We even looked outside through the glass, figuring maybe she went through some side door or exit. But the alley was empty. No one out there. No sign of her or the dog. Just some trash bins and a faded metal sign that said private property, no dumping. We stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out what we were missing. I even turned around and walked back the way we came, thinking maybe we'd missed a door or hallway. But there was nothing. Just the same beige carpet and yellow lights. We spent the next 10 or 15 minutes checking the layout of the building. We weren't really saying much to each other, just kind of letting the weirdness of it all settle in. We looked for another stairwell. We found one on the opposite side of the building, clear across the second floor. That was the only one. We double-checked the ground floor too. Same story. One stairwell, one elevator. That was it. We went outside and walked around the building. No side entrances, no emergency exits that weren't alarmed, No other way in or out of that hallway besides where we were. We even checked the alley behind the building again. Still no sign of her or the dog. I kept replaying it in my head. We'd seen her downstairs, coming out of the stairwell. She walked past us with the dog. Then we went up in the elevator, delivered the food, turned around, and saw her again, same woman, same dog, walking toward us from the opposite end of the hallway. It was weird, unsettling, but it wasn't paranormal. It didn't feel like that. It just felt off, like there was something about the building or that moment that we didn't understand. Back in the car, we tried to piece it together. Maybe she wasn't the same person? But no, that was the same woman. Same hoodie, same dog, same blank stare. We hadn't taken long on the delivery, maybe 3 minutes at most. There wasn't enough time for her to go upstairs and come back down and then somehow vanish. And even if she did use the stairs, how the hell did she turn a corner and walk into a dead end without being there when we turned it ourselves 2 seconds later? I couldn't stop thinking about it. We ended up sitting in the parking lot for a while, just watching the building. I think we both were hoping she'd come back out, that we'd see her again, and something would click. Maybe she had a twin. Maybe there was a shortcut inside we hadn't found. Something to make it all make sense. But we never saw her again. Not that night. And later, when we looked up the layout of the apartment complex online, it confirmed what we saw. One elevator. One stairwell. No back doors in that hallway. The windows on that end didn't even open fully. Just those crank-out panels that don't open wide enough for someone to crawl through. Not even for a small woman or her dog. Over the next few days, I found myself going back to that moment in my head, trying to reframe it. I started wondering if she lived in the building at all. What if she didn't? What if she was there for someone else? Or just cutting through? But that didn't explain the layout. Then I started thinking about her face. That blank stare. It wasn't hostile, but it also wasn't friendly. It was like she didn't see us, or didn't care that we saw her. And the way she moved, it was so casual. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't looking around. She just walked like she knew where she was going. Confident, straightforward, and then disappeared. I even thought about going back there one day, just to walk the hallways again, just to be sure. But something held me back. It wasn't fear exactly. Just a deep feeling that whatever happened that day wasn't meant to be explained. That we'd stumbled into a moment that wasn't for us. Like we'd seen something that normally happens when no one's looking. Something private. Something that goes unnoticed. I stopped going on delivery runs with my friend for a while after that. I couldn't get the image of that hallway out of my head. The brick wall. The dead end. Her turning the corner and vanishing like smoke. There was no ghost. No glitch in the matrix. No supernatural twist. Just a moment that didn't make sense. And maybe that's the scariest part. Not because it was evil or violent or full of shadows and screams, but because it was quiet, ordinary, real, and still it didn't fit. It still doesn't. I remember the first time we stayed in that church in Virginia. We were on our usual tour, a gospel-singing quartet traveling from town to town, singing for church services and small gatherings. It wasn't glamorous, but the music and the camaraderie with the other members kept us going. Sometimes, when churches didn't have the budget to put us up in a hotel, they would let us stay overnight in one of their buildings. It saved money, and we got to meet people who really cared about our ministry. This time, the church had a separate building, a small, old house that had been converted into classrooms and a nursery. The pastor told us it was fine for us to sleep there. The room I was staying in was small but comfortable enough. There were children's toys scattered around the floor, blocks, stuffed animals, and a rocking horse that looked like it belonged in some long-forgotten time. It felt strange being surrounded by so many things meant for children, things that seemed to hold memories of days long past. But we were tired, and all I wanted was to get some sleep before the service the next morning. The air mattress I slept on was a little deflated by the time I settled in, but it was better than the cold floor. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore the quiet, the kind of silence that seems to weigh heavily in a place that's been empty for too long. There was no real noise, just the occasional creak of the old building settling. It was peaceful, and at first I was grateful for it. That's when I woke up. At first, I couldn't place it. I wasn't fully awake, but I knew something was different. The air was heavier somehow, the silence sharper. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and I saw a figure standing near the edge of my bed. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there. My heart jumped in my chest, and I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. Who could it be? Was it Steven, our baritone? We had joked earlier about playing pranks on each other, and I figured maybe he was checking in on me, making sure I was okay. But as I stared at the figure, I realized something wasn't right. The shape was too still, too rigid. Steven would have said something, would have made a sound. This figure, though, was silent. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but it was too dark. Still, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, an instinctive fear that told me something wasn't normal. I whispered, my voice hoarse from sleep, "Steven?" The figure didn't move. It stayed frozen in place. Then suddenly it shifted. The movement was jerky, unnatural, like a glitch in the dark. Without any sound, it turned and bolted down the hallway, its footsteps strangely muffled. I could hear the soft scrape of its shoes against the old floorboards, and then the sound of a toy, a rocking horse, began to creak. The horse, positioned near the hallway, made a soft whirring noise, followed by a mechanical neigh and the sound of galloping hooves. The noise sent a chill through me, more so than the figure had. I had forgotten the toy was even there. It hadn't made a sound all night, and now, here it was, going off on its own. The galloping and the neighing felt too deliberate, as though it had been triggered by something, or someone. The noise was faint, but in the dead of night, it felt as loud as a clap of thunder. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was so profound, so intense, it felt like the whole world had stopped. The stillness was suffocating, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I couldn't lie there anymore. I couldn't stay in that room, not with that heavy silence surrounding me, with that dark figure still lingering in my mind. I got up quickly, pulling the sheets away from me, and stumbled into the next room where Steven was sleeping. I was shaking, trying to catch my breath as I knocked on his door. "Steven," I whispered urgently, my voice trembling. He woke up groggily, his eyes blinking in the dark as I explained what had happened. I told him about the figure standing over me, the toy, the silence. He didn't say anything at first. He was probably still half asleep, but I could tell he wasn't taking it as seriously as I was. He shrugged it off, probably thinking I had just been dreaming. But then, just as I was about to get back into bed, I heard it. A loud bang, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut. It came from downstairs, from the basement. Steven sat up, his eyes wide now. The sound of the door slamming echoed in the hallway, too real to ignore. It was like the building itself had reacted to something we couldn't see. I was about to say something when I heard it again, the rocking horse. It had started up once more, that same mechanical noise, the neighing and galloping. It was louder now, almost like it was right outside our door. I don't know what made me do it, but I grabbed Steven's hand and dragged him out of the room. We both stood in the hallway, too afraid to move, listening to the sounds echoing through the old house. The door downstairs was still open, wide and uninviting. The rocking horse had stopped again, but the feeling of being watched, of being surrounded, didn't go away. The next morning, I was exhausted. We hadn't slept much after the events of the night before. The light in the room seemed harsh, the quiet of the morning too much to bear after the tense hours of the night. When we went downstairs, we found the basement door wide open. It had been closed the night before. Steven and I had both noticed it when we had passed through. There was no sign of what had caused it to slam, and no explanation for the noises we had heard. The pastor greeted us with his usual warm smile and asked if we'd slept well. I didn't want to tell him about what happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I mentioned the strange noises, though, he didn't seem surprised. Instead, he told me that nursery workers had reported all sorts of strange occurrences in that building. He said they had heard things like the sounds of children playing when no one was there, doors opening on their own, and toys going off without explanation. It had been happening for years, and no one could figure out why. "We've just learned to live with it," he said, like it was a normal part of the church's history. "The building's old, and sometimes things just don't make sense." I didn't know what to make of his words. On one hand, I was relieved to know I wasn't just imagining things, but on the other, I was unsettled by how nonchalant he was about it. It felt like he had accepted the strangeness, like it was part of the fabric of the church. But it wasn't something I could accept. Not after what I had felt and heard that night. We packed up and left that afternoon, heading to our next stop. The whole experience stayed with me, though. It was like the silence of that night had followed me, clinging to me like a second skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow standing over my bed. Every time I heard the sound of a toy, I thought of that rocking horse, the way it seemed to come to life in the dark. But after that, I never stayed in that building again. And for the rest of the tour, I couldn't shake the feeling that sometimes the things that happen in the dark don't have easy explanations. They just are. I grew up in a house people swore was haunted. The kind of place where cabinets opened on their own, lights flickered even when the wiring was new, and footsteps echoed across the upstairs hallway when no one was there. Multiple people had stories, family, friends, even a few neighbors who had stayed the night. It wasn't just cold spots or shadows in the corner of your eye either. My older cousin once passed out cold after seeing a woman in white standing in the hallway mirror behind him. My dad, who wasn't the type to scare easy, never stayed up past 10 when he was home. He never admitted anything, but I caught him once sitting up with all the lights on, just staring at the doorway like he was waiting for something to come through it. But this story isn't about that house. By the time I was 14, we'd moved into a new apartment complex on the other side of town. It was modern and clean, with gray and white siding and perfectly square landscaping out front. It felt fresh, like something bad hadn't touched it yet. There were 6 buildings total, numbered 1 through 6. We were in building 4. Beyond buildings 5 and 6, there was nothing for a while, just some construction materials and dirt lots. The company had plans to add more buildings, but at that point, it was just empty land. You could walk out past the last finished building and down this wide dirt road that eventually cut through a wooded patch and came out at a main road with a strip mall across from it. My friends and I, Jamal and Chris, used to hang out near the unfinished part of the complex sometimes. It was quiet, no one ever went out that far, and the night air always felt cooler. We weren't doing anything special that night, just talking about school and video games and girls we had crushes on, and ended up wandering down that dirt road. It was one of those evenings where the air is soft and heavy, and you don't really notice how dark it's getting because you're distracted. There were no streetlights out there, only a faint glow from the lights back near the main complex. And even that was dim by the time you got far enough down the road. As we were heading back, passing by the frame of one of the unfinished buildings, basically just a skeleton of wood and scaffolding, we started to hear voices. They weren't loud, but they were clear. At first it sounded like maybe 2 or 3 guys, talking low and relaxed, like they were hanging out, not arguing or shouting. That part didn't scare us. People sometimes snuck around back there, teens drinking, maybe some workers staying late. We slowed down a little but kept walking. Then the tone changed. It wasn't gradual either. It flipped like someone switched stations on a radio. Instead of low male voices, we heard what sounded like a little girl. She was singing. I couldn't understand the words, but it was that unmistakable nursery rhyme rhythm. You know, the kind, slow, kind of circular, like a lullaby meant to loop around itself. We all froze. The singing wasn't loud. It didn't echo off the unfinished building or carry in the air like someone calling out. It was just there, steady and thin, like it was slipping through the boards and into the night. None of us said anything. No one made a joke or even looked at each other. We just turned and ran, all the way back to my apartment. We didn't talk much after we got inside. Jamal said something like that was weird, but we all agreed to let it go. I think we didn't want to admit how it made us feel, how wrong it was. A little girl's voice out there, where no one lived yet, where no one should have been. I didn't hear it again after that. At least, not right away. A couple months passed, maybe not even that long. School kept me busy, and I was spending more time in my room, drawing or playing games. The memory of that night faded a little. I never forgot it, but I stopped thinking about it every time I passed by those buildings. I think part of me had started convincing myself it was a speaker or a phone, or maybe some creepy kids messing around with us. Then one night I was lying in bed, half asleep. One of those nights where you're drifting and your body's relaxed, but your brain won't shut up. I remember the hum of the fan, the quiet creak of the apartment settling. The window was open a little because it was hot. Our unit faced the front of the complex, toward the main parking lot, and the sidewalk that ran past the front entrance. That's when I heard it again. Same voice, same rhythm, same barely there sound. It was outside, somewhere near the road. The words still didn't make sense, just syllables strung together in that same sing-song loop. I went cold. It wasn't like the night before when I'd had company. This time I was alone in my room, and the sound felt like it was aimed right at me. It took my brain a second to catch up to what I was hearing. Then it snapped into place, and I bolted out of bed. I didn't even think. I didn't care about what I was wearing or how loud my footsteps were. I just ran straight down the hallway to my mom's room. I didn't sleep in my room that night. My mom asked if something was wrong, and I just said I thought I heard someone outside. She didn't press, probably assumed it was just one of those weird teenage fears that don't need explaining. I kept waiting for it to happen again. It didn't, not in the same way, but I started noticing other things after that. The hallway light outside my room would flicker sometimes, not constantly, just at random, quick bursts like it was trying to grab my attention. The door to the laundry closet near the kitchen creaked open more often than before. I started checking the locks on the front door more than once before going to bed. I didn't feel scared exactly. Not like there was a ghost about to grab me from under the bed. It was a different kind of fear, quieter, stretched out over days. A background noise in my brain that wouldn't shut off. I was constantly waiting for that voice to come back, for that soft singing to leak in through the walls or windows again. I never told Jamal or Chris about hearing it that second time. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to give it more weight. Maybe I didn't want them to admit they'd heard it too. One afternoon, I walked down that road again by myself. I didn't plan on it. I was bored, it was a Saturday, and I ended up heading that way just to kill time. The construction site was more developed by then. They'd started adding siding and windows to the buildings, and the piles of materials had been moved around. The dirt road still led back to the main street, but now there was fencing around most of the site. I stood there for a minute, just staring at the frame of the building where we'd heard the voice that night. There was no sound, no breeze, no birds, nothing. Then I noticed something. Near the edge of the building, past the fencing, was a small patch of dirt that looked out of place. The rest of the lot was packed down, dry, and crisscrossed with tire marks from trucks. But this spot looked loose, like it had been dug up and filled in again. I didn't go closer. I just stood there looking at it, a little chill working its way up my spine. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a plumbing line or wiring conduit someone had to bury. But even then, part of me didn't buy it. It was too close to the frame, too small, and I didn't want to know what was under there. The construction wrapped up not long after that. The new buildings were finished, people moved in, and the area got busier. Families, kids, cars coming and going. Noise returned to that part of the complex. I never heard the voice again. Not once. But every time I walked by those buildings, or saw the place from the bus window, I remembered it. That voice with no words. That song that had no beginning or end. And the way it felt, like it didn't come from a person or a place, but from something else entirely. Something that just wanted to be heard. And after all these years, I still think about it sometimes. Not like a scary story, not like a ghost tale, but as a moment that cut into my life and never really healed over. Whatever it was real. And it happened. That's enough. It was one of those nights where everything feels just a bit off, the kind of night you don't recognize until you're already deep in it. I was 19, living in Pennsylvania, which, if you haven't spent much time there, is like a Stephen King novel on a bad day. Everywhere you turn, there's thick woods, fog, and that never-ending sense of something lurking just beyond your sight. But that night, the fog had a different feel to it, like it was hanging lower than usual, heavy with the rain that had been coming down all night. My girlfriend's house sat tucked away in the woods on the side of a mountain, a beautiful, rustic home that looked like something out of a storybook. Only the kind of storybook where the plot turns dark and unsettling when you least expect it. Her family was super chill with me, despite the usual awkwardness of a teenage relationship. But they had one rule: no sleepovers. It was never really explained why, but I wasn't going to press it. The old man had a way of looking at me that made it clear he wasn't too fond of having a guy like me lingering around his daughter. So, we had to be sneaky. Wait for everyone to go to bed, sneak in some alone time. Then I'd head out in the middle of the night, usually between 2 and 3 a.m. It was no big deal. I'm a night owl by nature, so driving back home through the woods in the dead of night didn't bother me much. In fact, I almost enjoyed it. The quiet, the solitude, the peace. It's like the world was asleep, and I was the only one left moving through it. This particular night was no different, or so I thought. It had been raining hard, the kind of rain that blurs everything. The road was slick, and the fog that hung in the air clung to the ground, swirling around like some kind of ghost. I just finished saying my goodbyes, quiet, secretive, nothing out of the ordinary, and made my way to my car, a beat-up Subaru that had been through hell and back. The headlights sliced through the thick air as I approached the vehicle, the rain drumming on the roof and the ground beneath me slick with wet leaves. I popped the trunk open to throw my bag in before getting in, when I heard it. A noise. Low, rasping, like a dog trying to bark but muffled. My immediate thought was a stray dog, though there wasn't much of a reason for one to be out in the woods at this hour. Still, I couldn't help but turn my head in the direction of the sound, squinting through the rain, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. I couldn't see much, just the fog and the shadows of the trees around me. Then I heard it again. This time, it was a growl, but not a normal growl. It was wet and ragged, like the sound of something fighting for breath. My heart skipped a beat, and instinctively, my hand gripped the keys in my pocket, pulling them out. My thumb brushed against the sharp edges of the car key, and for a split second, I considered just running. But my feet were frozen, and the noise, it was getting closer. That raspy snarl sounded like it was coming from the trees, not far off. I could feel my stomach twist into knots. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to turn around. But I had no choice. I slowly pivoted, eyes darting through the mist, trying to make sense of the shadows. And then I saw it. Two glowing eyes, reflecting the headlights from my car. That's when everything clicked into place. The thing, whatever it was, wasn't moving like a dog. It was too fast, too frantic. The eyes were too wild, too intelligent. And the snarl, it wasn't the playful bark of a stray dog. It was the growl of something primal, territorial. My brain raced through 1,000 thoughts, but none of them made sense. Was it a wolf? A coyote? No, it was too small, but its movements were completely wrong. It was low to the ground, almost hunched over, and I realized, for the first time, that whatever this was, it wasn't friendly. I didn't want to wait to find out. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drum, and my breath was shallow, quick. I didn't think. I just ran for the car. The rain kept falling, the mist making everything look like it was underwater. My hand was shaking as I fumbled for the car key, trying to jam it into the door, my fingers slipping in the panic. I heard it again, a scrape, a claw dragging against the wet ground, and then suddenly, I was in the car, slamming the door shut behind me with a force I didn't even know I had in me. I threw the keys into the ignition, desperately trying to turn it, my whole body trembling. I finally got it. The engine roared to life. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I heard it. The impact. The teeth. Wham. The sound of claws and teeth slamming against the driver's side window. My stomach dropped. My blood ran cold. I whipped my head to the side, staring straight into the eyes of something wild, something insane. A fox. But not any fox. Its fur was matted, its eyes crazed with hunger or fear or something I couldn't understand. Its teeth were bared, slashing at the window, trying to break through the glass like it was desperate to reach me. I could see the spit dripping from its mouth, hear the claws scratching and scraping against the glass. For a second, I froze. I couldn't believe what was happening. A fucking fox. It wasn't a wolf or a bear, nothing like what I'd expected, but it was so goddamn aggressive that it didn't matter. It was insane. This thing wasn't acting like a wild animal. It was acting like something broken, like it was beyond reasoning. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas. The fox wasn't fast enough. It stumbled half mad as I rolled over the spot where it had been. I felt the tires crunch over something soft, a sickening sound of something being crushed. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. My heart was in my throat, my hands sweating on the wheel. I didn't slow down. Not until I was on the main road again, the fog finally starting to clear, and the rain beginning to let up. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My thoughts were all over the place. I couldn't shake the image of that fox's eyes, the way it had lunged at me with everything it had. But there was one thought that stuck with me. The thing my girlfriend's parents had said at dinner the week before. They'd mentioned that a rabid fox had been attacking local pets, and they'd had a few dogs taken in for treatment. It hadn't registered at the time, but now it made sense. That fucking fox was rabid. That was the only explanation. When I got home, I smoked the biggest blunt I had, just to calm my nerves. But even that didn't help. I couldn't stop thinking about it. about how close I'd come to being that fox's next victim. It was insane how quickly everything could go from casual to life-threatening, how quickly the woods could turn on you. I didn't sleep much that night, and when morning came, I told myself I was going to forget about it, but I never did. Every time I drove past that stretch of road, every time I found myself in the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. And the weirdest part? After all that, I never saw that fox again. It was a Friday night in the fall, sometime around late October, and the air had that crisp bite to it that always makes your hoodie feel just right. I was in middle school back then, and my sister, who had already moved out of the house by then, decided to come pick me up and take me to the movies. She had just gotten a car not long ago, a black Honda Civic with loud speakers and a pile of random junk scattered across the back seat. I still remember the smell, coconut car freshener mixed with old fast food bags. She always had some kind of iced coffee in the cup holder, and her seat was way too far back, like she was trying to lay down while driving. That was just her way. She'd promised to take me to see Scary Movie 3, which had just come out. I was way too young for it, but she didn't care. That's what I loved about her. She treated me like a little sidekick more than a younger brother. The theater was maybe 15 minutes away, in a strip mall with this long parking lot that always smelled like popcorn and cigarettes. I don't remember much of the movie, just that it was ridiculous and full of cheap scares and dumb jokes, but we laughed the whole time. I remember us quoting lines on the way out and repeating the dumbest scenes over and over, like we were reenacting a sketch show. We got back into her car, and it was already dark outside, probably past 10:30. She cranked up the music and started driving us home. The roads were mostly empty at that hour, and the neighborhoods we passed through were quiet, those sleepy streets where all the porch lights are yellow and the curtains are always closed. We were still joking around, doing dumb voices and trying to out-creep each other. I remember us doing that thing where you whisper a creepy story and then suddenly yell to scare the other person. It was harmless fun, just kids being dumb, laughing in the dark with nothing to worry about. My sister loved to mess with me, but I never minded it. She was the kind of person who would tell you a ghost story and then forget to tell you it was fake, just to see you squirm. We finally turned onto our street. My house was about halfway down, just past the bend. It wasn't a big house, 2 stories, plain siding, a wide driveway, and those huge glass front doors. Those doors were kind of a weird design choice. They stretched from top to bottom, and they weren't frosted or tinted, just clear glass. You could see straight into the living room from the street. At night, if the lights were on inside, it was like a display window. My mom always kept the front lamps on, which meant the entire space was lit up like a stage. We were still mid-laugh when she eased the car up toward the curb. We weren't pulling into the driveway. She was just going to let me out on the street, like she always did. But right as the headlights swept across the house, we both stopped laughing at the same time. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. It was like the temperature in the car dropped. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I had this sudden tightness in my chest, like something was wrong and my body already knew before my brain could catch up. The car slowed down just a little more, and we both just stared straight ahead at the front doors. That's when I saw him, a man, standing inside my house, looking directly out the glass doors toward the street. He wasn't moving, just standing. The lighting from inside the house lit him up enough to see the details clearly. He was pale, not just light-skinned, but pale like he hadn't been in the sun for months. His hair was long brown and pulled back into a ponytail. He was wearing this long, blue coat that reached past his knees, kind of like something you'd see in a history book. It reminded me of a Revolutionary War soldier, which didn't make any sense. The clothes weren't modern at all. It looked like something from a costume store, but somehow more worn in and real. I remember blinking hard, trying to see if it was just a trick of the light, maybe a shadow or a reflection. But it wasn't. He was there. He was solid. And he was looking out toward us, like he had been standing there a long time waiting for someone to arrive. My sister didn't say anything for a second, then turned to me and asked if I saw it too. Her voice was low, flat. Not teasing, not joking. And that's when my stomach dropped. Because she never used that tone unless she was serious. And she always joked, even when she was kind of freaked out. That moment, her voice being so calm and quiet, is what scared me the most. I had goosebumps all over. The hair on my arms was sticking up, and my legs felt suddenly cold. It was like the whole fun of the evening had been sucked out in a split second. I nodded slowly. I couldn't even form words at first. I was hoping, praying she was messing with me, that it was another prank. I asked her what she saw, just to make sure. She described exactly what I had seen, down to the hair, the coat, the way he was just standing there, watching the street. That's when I knew I wasn't making it up. We both saw the same thing. We sat there in silence, the car idling, headlights still glowing faintly against the curb. Then, without saying anything, she pulled away from the curb and started driving again. Just like that, a wide circle around the block. We didn't speak the entire time. I don't even remember breathing. The air felt tight. My brain was spinning, trying to make sense of it. Was someone inside our house? How could they have gotten in? And why would they just be standing there? Not moving, not walking around, just staring out the glass? When we turned back onto our street and approached the house again, I braced myself. I kept staring at the front doors, waiting to see the figure again. But the man was gone. The living room was still lit up, empty now. No sign of anyone. No movement, no shadows. Nothing. She stopped the car again in front of the house. Neither of us wanted to speak first. Eventually, she exhaled sharply and told me to get out. She said it quickly, almost like she was scared to say more. I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. It was late. I had school in the morning. I stepped out, my heart racing, and looked back at her. She gave me this small nod, didn't even wait for me to get all the way to the door. As soon as I shut the car door, she sped off. I stood there for a second, looking at the glass doors again, trying to see if anything was moving. The room was empty. Everything looked normal, but the normalness is what felt so wrong. I walked slowly up to the front steps, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. That heavy kind of quiet where you can hear the fridge humming, and the tick of the wall clock feels louder than it should. I checked the living room first. No one. I checked behind the couches, the hallway, the kitchen. Nothing. Everything in its place. I went upstairs and found my parents half asleep in their room watching TV. I told them what we saw. I was still shaken, and I know my voice must have been weird because they immediately sat up. But when I told them about the man in the coat, they laughed. They didn't even try to hide it. They said we were just spooked from the movie and probably saw a reflection or a shadow. I stood there for a moment, waiting for them to reconsider, but they didn't. My mom patted the bed next to her, told me to calm down and get some sleep. I didn't bother explaining more. I just went to my room and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking I'd hear footsteps downstairs or see someone walk past the glass again. The house had always felt a little strange to me, but that night changed something. I started noticing little things after that. Doors that would be slightly open when I knew I'd shut them. Lights flicking off and on. I'd come home and swear that something had been moved just slightly out of place. My sister didn't come by much after that. She'd already moved out, but after that night she rarely visited unless it was a holiday or a birthday. And even then, she never stayed long. Sometimes we'd talk about it. Years later, when I was older, I asked her again if she remembered what we saw. She didn't hesitate. She described the man exactly the same. Every detail. She even said the same thing I had thought, that it didn't look like a modern outfit, that something about it just felt off, but not in a costume store kind of way. It felt too real, too lived in. We never saw the man again, and no one ever broke into the house or anything like that. It was just that one moment. My parents never changed their minds. They always laughed it off or brushed it aside. But slowly, I think they started to feel it too. My mom used to spend all her time in the living room, but after a while she started hanging out more in the kitchen or upstairs. My dad installed blinds on the glass doors a few months later, which he said was for privacy. But I always wondered if he saw something too. He never said. Eventually we moved. The new house didn't have glass doors. I didn't think about that night much after we left, but every now and then, something will remind me of it. A flash of blue in a reflection, the way headlights hit a house at night, the feeling of being watched when there's no one around. And every time, I think about how real that moment was. It wasn't a joke, and it wasn't a shadow. We both saw him. There's no explaining that away. I still don't know who he was, or what he was doing in our house. But I know what I saw. We both saw the same thing. And sometimes, knowing that someone else saw it too is the only thing that keeps me from thinking I imagined it. It was real. Whatever the reason, Whatever the explanation, it was real. And that's enough. The summer after my freshman year of college, I spent a lot of time back home, just trying to figure things out. Classes had burned me out. I didn't have a summer job lined up, and most of my time was filled with long walks, late-night drives, or just hanging out with people from the area. There wasn't much to do where I lived except kill time. I ended up getting close with this girl I met through a mutual friend, and we hung out a lot. She lived maybe 10 minutes from me, and we'd go on drives, get food, talk about college life, whatever. I was still sort of figuring out who I was, and she was too. I think that's part of why we clicked. There's a part of town near us that's kind of its own little world. It's got cobblestone streets, antique shops, bars, weird art galleries, and it's right next to a bunch of woods. The whole area has this worn-down charm, like it's been around forever. Old buildings, some of them half collapsed, vines climbing up the sides, iron fences with rusted tips. It looks cool during the day, but it takes on a different feel at night. Like the shadows hang on a little longer than they should. People always said it was haunted, especially the woods just beyond the shops. Kids told stories about people getting lost back there. Old stories, some dating back to the 1800s. But no one took it seriously. At least, not the people I hung out with. One evening, the girl and I were parked near one of those antique stores after walking around. A friend of mine was with us too. The three of us just stood by the car and talked for a while. At some point, she brought up this local story about a doll in the woods. She said if you find it and move it, the ghost of the little girl who owned it would come back and put it back where it belonged. Supposedly, people had tried it before. Some swore they moved it and came back the next day to find it in the exact same place. I didn't think much of it, but my friend and I laughed and said, "All right, where's this doll?" She told us the general area to look. There were ruins of an old building not far off the road, a concrete foundation, some crumbling walls, a staircase that led nowhere, a spot that looked like it had been eaten by time. She said the doll was usually found somewhere around there. So we made this dumb plan to come back that night and look for it, just to say we did. None of us thought we'd actually find anything. We were just bored. That night, my friend and I went back without her at first. It was late, maybe 11 or so. The area was dead quiet. We parked the car just off the road with the front facing toward the woods. The ruins were about 20 feet from the edge of the road. We kept the headlights on and used our flashlights to look around. The beams cut through the trees and landed on pieces of concrete and rotting wood. Bugs buzzed around, hitting our necks and faces, the air thick with that summer humidity that never really cools down at night. It didn't take long. We were stepping over some mossy bricks near what looked like the old front of the building when I spotted it. This small, old-looking doll just sitting on a cement ledge, its legs dangling over the edge. Its clothes were yellowed, its hair stiff and matted. It had that porcelain look, with faded paint on the face, the eyes dull and slightly off-center. I stopped in my tracks. I don't know what it was, but something about seeing it just sitting there made my skin crawl. I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected. Dust came off the back of its head when I moved it. It smelled faintly of mildew. I held it up in the flashlight's beam, and my friend just stared at it, half laughing but not really. We couldn't believe it. I called the girl to tell her we found it. She was surprised, like genuinely excited, and said she'd come meet up with us. She wanted to see it herself. While we waited, I walked over to the other side of the road. It was darker over there, thicker with trees. I didn't want to just leave it on the ground, so I chucked it deep into the woods, just overhand, as far as I could, not even aiming for anything. We didn't hear it land. Just silence. Then we got in the car and drove down the hill toward the main road to meet her. She pulled up maybe 5 minutes later, and we stood around near the cars, not really saying much about the doll. I was still half joking about it, but something about the way the trees looked behind us felt off. Not like I thought anything was watching us. Just, I don't know, too quiet. We were talking about food or something when I heard that beep. That soft, single chirp a car makes when you press the lock button, even though it's already locked. I looked at my key. I hadn't touched anything. It was in my hand, but I didn't press the button. Then her car alarm went off. It was loud and sudden. Lights flashing, horn blaring. We all jumped. She scrambled to shut it off, looking more scared than I'd ever seen her. My stomach dropped. It wasn't like someone just leaned on her car. It felt wrong. forced, like something was trying to rattle us. We stood there frozen. I told them we should just leave and get food. I was trying to brush it off like I wasn't scared, but I was. She didn't want to drive alone. She begged one of us to ride with her. My friend and I looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to, so we said we'd check her car over real quick before we all left, just to make sure nothing was messed up. I walked around to the back, toward the trunk. It wasn't open, but I leaned down and looked through the back window, flashlight aimed through the glass. My legs locked up. The doll was sitting upright in her trunk, propped against the back of the seat, facing out. Same stiff hair, same yellow dress, same dead eyes. I don't know how long I stared at it. My throat closed up, and my heart was beating in my ears. I felt something crawl up my spine, this cold, paralyzing dread. My friend walked over, asked me what I saw. I couldn't answer. I just stepped back. He looked through too, and his face changed instantly. The girl walked over, saw it, and burst into tears. Not loud crying. That silent, breathless kind where the fear's already taken over. None of us knew what to say. I opened the trunk slowly. It wasn't locked. I picked the doll up again, holding it by one arm like it might bite me. I didn't look at its face. I just walked back to the car, got in, and drove back up the hill, back to where we found it. The ruins looked the same. Still, quiet, empty. I walked back to the cement ledge, set the doll down exactly where it had been, and didn't look back. We drove home without saying a word. I dropped them both off, went home, and didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling until the sun started to come up. For the next few days, I tried not to think about it. I didn't talk to her or my friend about it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. We all saw it. We all knew it wasn't right, but none of us knew what to do with it. A week later, I drove past that spot in the middle of the day. I slowed down, rolled down my window, and looked toward the ruins. The ledge was empty. I didn't stop. Years passed. I barely spoke to the girl after that summer. Not for any bad reason. Life just pulled us in different directions. My friend and I talked a few times, but we never brought up that night. It was like a silent agreement. Leave it alone. Eventually, I told the story to someone, and then again, and again. Each time, I made it a little more polished. It became one of those stories you pull out at the right moment. But I never added anything to it. I never had to. The truth was enough. I never saw that doll again. Never went back to those woods. And I still don't understand how it got in her trunk. No one touched her car. The trunk was closed the whole time. It wasn't even near where I threw the doll. I still think about that. But the part that sticks with me the most wasn't the moment I saw it in the trunk. It was the silence in the woods when I put it back. Not a single sound. No bugs, no breeze, no movement. Just the feeling that something had been watching. Not angry, not sad, just watching, and then letting me go. I still think about that house sometimes, even though it's been years. It was supposed to be the dream. When we first saw it, I thought we had won the lottery. It was perfect, big, secluded, and cozy. The kind of house you can imagine yourself living in forever, raising kids and hosting Christmas dinners. It was right by a busy intersection, but the trees out front kept it hidden from view. From the street, it looked like the trees were guarding it, and they muffled the noise from the road. It felt like a safe little island in a chaotic world. We had just finished moving in when we decided to go out for ice cream to celebrate. It was one of those evenings where everything felt right. The weather was perfect, and my parents were in a good mood. The house was packed with boxes, and we were tired, but that ice cream trip felt like the perfect way to finish the day. When we got home, the air felt different, like something had shifted. The gate to the driveway was wide open, which was strange because we always made sure it was locked. My brother, who was 14 at the time, went straight to his room to check on his laptop. It was gone. Just like that, missing. We panicked. My mom immediately called the police. I remember standing by the window, feeling this knot in my stomach, looking at the empty driveway, and wondering who had been inside while we were gone. An officer came by shortly after, and we let him search the house. It was the most surreal experience I had ever had. The officer went through every room, checked every closet, even the attic. It felt like a violation, but it also felt like we had no choice. Then, up in the attic, he found something that made our skin crawl, a bag of marijuana. At first, we didn't know what to make of it. We weren't doing anything wrong, But the discovery made the house feel even stranger, like someone had been living there, or worse, using the place as some sort of hideout. We spent the next few days a little on edge. The police had no answers, and the feeling of invasion lingered. But nothing else happened. Not for a while. A few months passed, and we settled into a routine. The house felt quieter again. We went to Monterey Bay for a weekend trip, just to get away. When we came back, it was like something had shifted again. The windows in the shop were shattered, and the kitchen was a mess. It was as if someone had broken in, but there was no sign of forced entry. We filed another police report, but this time, nothing came of it. We still had no idea who had done it, or why they targeted us. And then, about a week later, we saw a man. He was standing near the back of our property, walking around with a dog. It was early in the morning, and I was still groggy from waking up. My dad saw him first, and yelled at him to get off our land. The man didn't say anything. He just turned around and ran, jumping the fence like he'd done it 100 times before. My dad called the police, but when they showed up, there was no sign of the guy. No dog, no footprints, just the unsettling feeling that someone had been watching us. Christmas came and went without incident. The house felt calm for a while, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the weird things that had happened, it was the vibe of the place. Every time we were inside, we couldn't help but feel like someone was lurking just outside, waiting for the right moment. It felt like the house was full of secrets. Then in March of 2014, things got worse. Our elderly neighbors, who lived across the street, had been gone for a while. We had seen some people in their yard, young adults in their mid-20s, and it made us nervous. They weren't the kind of people you'd expect to be hanging around the property. We tried to ignore it at first, but as the days passed, the unease grew. We stayed up one night, listening, and we could hear their voices coming from the other side of the street. It was hard to make out what they were saying, but the words we did catch sent chills down my spine. Just go and break in, and they're outside, wait until they go in. My parents were worried, but we didn't want to jump to conclusions. The next few weeks were quiet, though, until one day in April. It was a bright morning, and we saw a swarm of police cars outside our neighbor's house. The street was blocked off with caution tape, and there were ambulances and fire trucks everywhere. They had dogs with them, and they were searching the area like they were looking for something, or someone. It was surreal. We never went over to ask what had happened, but our parents started talking about moving. It wasn't just the events that had taken place in the last few months. It was the constant feeling of being watched. My mom and dad decided it was time to go. Over the next 2 weeks, we packed up everything we could. It was a slow process, but we were determined to get out. I remember seeing the old couple's house being boarded up by the police. It was strange. It felt like everything was unraveling around us. The house we had thought would be our forever home was turning into a nightmare. One day, we went over to ask what had happened to the elderly couple. The officer who had been working on the case explained that they had been murdered. And not just killed, they were butchered. The details were so grotesque, I didn't want to hear them. They had been chopped up into pieces and shoved into their fridge. It was like something out of a horror movie, but it was real. The police only discovered the bodies when a friend of theirs went to check on them and reported a smell of decaying flesh. That's when everything started to make sense. The people we had seen hanging around the house, those strange young adults, had something to do with it. And the worst part, we had been living just across the street from a murder scene, and we hadn't even known it. When we came back to grab the last of our things, everything was different. Our baby grand piano, the one my mom had always wanted, had been sawed in half. All our appliances were thrown out onto the lawn like they were garbage. It was like the place we had once called home had been destroyed, piece by piece. The feeling of safety, of comfort, was gone. It was replaced by something darker. We were lucky to get out when we did. The investigation eventually led to 4 suspects, one of whom was arrested. The rest? They were never found. But we didn't stick around to find out. The house was put up for sale. We left Elk Grove, and I don't think we'll ever go back. The memories of that place are still fresh in my mind. Every time I close my eyes, I remember the broken windows, the shattered piano, the eerie feeling of someone always watching. That house wasn't just a place to live, it was a trap that we had walked into without realizing it. It had been hiding something sinister all along, something we didn't see until it was too late. When I look back now, I don't think it was just the house that was cursed. It was the land. There was something about that area, about Elk Grove, that felt off. Like it had seen too many things that people weren't meant to see. That house, the neighbors, the people who lived there, and even the police officers who came to investigate. It all felt like a dark puzzle that we were only just beginning to understand before we left. I can still hear the sound of the piano, sawed in half, and it makes my stomach turn. The worst part is knowing that whatever happened to the elderly couple could have easily happened to us. In the end, we were lucky to get out when we did, but sometimes I still wonder, if we had stayed a little longer, would we have been the next ones to disappear? Growing up in rural Alaska was never anything like what people imagined it to be. It wasn't all wide open spaces and rolling hills. There were long, cold winters and summers that felt short enough that if you blinked, you'd miss them. My family was used to the land in a way that no one could ever quite understand unless they lived it. It wasn't just the isolation, it was the understanding that the land had its own rhythm, and you had to learn to follow it or risk becoming just another forgotten part of it. Every year, we'd take a hunting trip about 80 miles out of town, then another 20 miles deeper into the mountains. Those trips were a tradition, the kind of thing where the family would gather in the fall, stock up on gear, load the trucks, and head out. We had our usual hunting spots, but there was a stretch of land out past the river, just at the foot of the mountains, that always felt different. Even as a kid, I could feel it. My family was well aware of it too. They always talked about the quiet, the way the wind never seemed to blow through the trees right there, how the shadows looked like they stayed just a little too long, how the animals around there always seemed to act strange. But every year, we still went back. One year, my family, all of us, sat around the campfire. It was one of those crisp nights where the air felt thin, the stars were sharp in the sky, and the moon hung low and full, casting everything in a soft silver light. We had just finished a long day out in the woods, tracking caribou, and were unwinding by the fire. Everyone was tired, and the crackling of the fire, along with the distant sounds of the river, made it feel like a perfect night for nothing to happen. Just a peaceful evening in the middle of nowhere, where nothing could go wrong. But then there was a sound, something from the river. It wasn't the usual sound of water flowing over rocks or animals moving near the shore. This was something bigger, something heavier. My uncle, the one who was always trying to convince us he was the most experienced outdoorsman in the family, stood up slowly. He had that look in his eyes, the one you get when something doesn't sit right, when the familiar is suddenly unfamiliar. He gestured toward the sandbar next to the river. You hear that? I squinted through the dark, trying to make out what it was. The moon was bright, but it wasn't enough to see clearly at that distance. We could all hear it now. A kind of rustling, the sound of something heavy moving through the brush, but it wasn't the sound of an animal hunting or looking for food. It was something more deliberate. We all stood up, and the firelight flickered, casting shadows around us. As we watched, there was a figure that stepped out of the tree-line. At first, we thought it might be a bear, but as it moved into the moonlight, we saw it clearly. It wasn't a bear, not by any stretch of the imagination. The figure was big, huge even. Its body was covered in hair, dark and matted, like it had been walking through the forest for days without stopping. But the size of it, the way it moved, there was no mistaking it. It was standing upright on two legs like a person, but the shape was all wrong. The head was too large, the arms too long. It was easily 9 feet tall, maybe more. It didn't move like a man either. There was a strange fluidity to it, like it wasn't quite human, but not quite animal either. I remember the way the hair on the back of my neck stood up, how every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. I could hear my dad breathing hard beside me, his hand on the rifle slung across his back. But none of us made a move. We just stared. For a long moment, the creature didn't move. It stood there, watching us, and we watched it. The air around us seemed to grow still, unnaturally quiet. It was like the entire world had frozen, and for just a second, it was as if nothing else existed but that moment. Then, without warning, it moved. The creature didn't run like any animal I'd seen before. It wasn't like a bear charging, its heavy paws slamming the ground. No, this thing, whatever it was, moved with a speed and grace that shouldn't have been possible for something so massive. It didn't lumber. It didn't hesitate. It simply turned and sprinted back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness with such speed it was like it had vanished in the blink of an eye. Nobody said anything for a long time after that. We just stood there, the silence stretching out like it had no end. My uncle, who always had a story for everything, had no words. My dad looked like he was trying to process what had just happened, but no one could make sense of it. We didn't even talk about it that night. We just sat back down, the fire crackling weakly between us. Nobody wanted to bring it up. We stayed in the camp for the night, and nobody slept much. The silence that followed the creature's appearance was deafening. It was as if the entire forest had decided to hold its breath. We kept looking out into the darkness, expecting to see it again, but the moon had begun to fade behind clouds, and the shadows were getting too thick to make anything out. The next morning, we packed up camp and headed back to the truck. There was no talk about it, no mention of the thing we'd all seen, but everyone knew it was there, and everyone felt it, like a weight hanging over the whole trip. The drive back into town was quieter than usual. We all kept looking at each other, knowing that we had seen something we couldn't explain, something that didn't fit into the world we thought we knew. But it didn't matter. We were just a family out in the wilderness, doing what families do when they've lived with the land long enough. We kept moving. That was the year we all talked about the creature, the figure, the thing we all saw on the river's edge. Some of us called it a bear, others thought it might have been some kind of giant man. But deep down, we all knew what it was. Something that didn't belong in this world, something we couldn't explain, and something we'd never be able to forget. Years have passed since then, but the memory hasn't faded. Every time I go out hunting, even now, I remember that moment, standing around the fire with my family, watching that massive, hairy thing move through the darkness. I've asked myself 100 times if it was just a bear, but I can't shake the feeling that we saw something more that night. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. But whatever it was real. And for all the years since, every time I've gone out into the wilds of Alaska, I've carried that memory with me. Because deep down, I know that whatever we saw that night, it's out there still. Watching, waiting. And it's something no one will ever really be able to explain. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. That sometimes, in the wilderness, you don't just encounter the things you can explain. Sometimes you come face to face with the things that defy all explanation. It was just supposed to be a normal night. My cousins, their friend, and I had settled into my grandma's house, a place that was always a bit strange, but in a comfortable, familiar way. The creaky floors, the soft hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen, the scent of wood and old leather. Those were the things that made it feel like home. But that night, it didn't feel like home at all. It felt off, like something was waiting just out of reach, something I couldn't put my finger on. We were all sitting in the living room, joking and talking, when my younger cousin, the one with the wide eyes and an imagination that often ran wild, suddenly grew quiet. He looked like he was about to say something important, but his eyes darted nervously between us. I could tell he was unsure whether we'd believe him or not, and at that point, we weren't taking him seriously. He had always been the one to come up with these crazy stories, so we were all a little skeptical. But after a moment, he spoke up. "I need to tell you something," he started, his voice a mix of hesitation and fear. "I'm not sure if you'll believe me, but me and my sister have been seeing something in our house." At this, all of us exchanged skeptical glances. My cousins rolled their eyes, and I felt a knot in my stomach, part curiosity, part disbelief. But we all urged him to go ahead and tell us. It was hard to take him seriously, especially since he had this tendency to exaggerate, but his tone made it sound like this wasn't just another one of his tall tales. He went on to describe what had been happening. "One night, I woke up," he began, his voice lowering as if he was trying to convince himself as much as he was convincing us. "And I saw someone in the doorway, just watching me while I was asleep. I tried to chase them, but when I got to the kitchen, the dog was barking like crazy, and they were just gone, like they vanished through the wall." We were all listening now, hanging on every word. He said the figure was short, with spiky hair, glowing eyes, sharp teeth, and wearing a cloak. The image that painted in my mind was unsettling, but I couldn't shake the doubt. Was it just a bad dream? Maybe he had imagined it. But he wasn't done yet. "There was another time," he continued, "when I needed to go to the bathroom. But when I got up, someone was in there. I checked the house to make sure no one was missing, but I couldn't figure out who it could have been. I woke up Mom, and when she tried to open the door, it started shaking really hard. She yelled, 'Leave us the fuck alone.' And then it stopped. But my sister said she saw the thing walking down the hall, climbing up the walls, smiling at her before running away. I was stunned. I didn't know what to think. On one hand, it sounded like a bad dream or an overactive imagination, but there was something about the way he said it that made me start to doubt. Still, I couldn't quite believe it. The details seemed too specific, too strange to be made up. The room fell silent for a moment before we tried to lighten the mood, making jokes at his expense. But the seriousness in his eyes made it hard to brush it off. My oldest cousin, who had been living at my grandma's house at the time, was the next to speak. He decided to ask my aunt about it the next morning. The next day, when my cousin's mom came over for breakfast, we decided to ask her if she knew anything about it. I remember how her face went completely blank when we mentioned what my little cousin had said. It was like she had just seen a ghost, and I suddenly felt that chill creeping up my spine. She didn't say much at first, but then, in a hushed voice, she replied, "Oh, he told you about that." At that moment, all of us were silent, trying to process what we had just heard. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't just some made-up story. Whatever it was, it had been real. My cousin's mom didn't offer much more, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. We were all a little shaken now, unsure of what to believe. My cousin, clearly worried about his family, decided to move back home that day, hoping to protect them from whatever this thing was. It seemed like the right thing to do, even if we didn't fully understand what was happening. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Later that evening, I was in my room, standing by the open window, filling my markers with paint. The air was cool, and the house was quiet, with only the sounds of the neighborhood outside. But then, I began to hear something. It was soft at first, like whispers, just faint enough to make me strain to hear. It didn't sound like one person, but a collection of voices, all murmuring at once, almost like a ball of whispers. I froze. It didn't make sense. I tried to focus on it, but the whispers were too indistinct, blending into each other. It sounded like it was coming from outside the window, but there was no one there. My heart began to race, and I felt a sudden, inexplicable chill run down my spine. "Who's that?" I asked aloud, my voice shaky. The whispers stopped for a moment, and then one voice, clear and unmistakable, said, "It's me, let me in." I swear, it sounded just like my cousin, the one who had moved out earlier. My stomach dropped, and I felt a knot in my chest. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. It was strange. Why would he be outside, whispering like that? I knew he had gone to stay at his friend's house, so it didn't make sense. I responded, almost out of habit, "Hold on, I'm doing something." The whispers came again, growing more persistent. "What?" "It's me. Let me in." I could feel my nerves starting to fray. My usual response would have been to let him in without a second thought, but something was holding me back. It didn't feel right. The whispers grew louder, and I felt a pressure in my chest, like I couldn't breathe. I called out again, "What, dude? I can't hear you." "What?" There was no answer, just the whispers swirling around me. I stood there, unable to move, as the odd sensation of dread spread through my body. I wanted to look outside, to see if it was really him, but I couldn't. I don't know why, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My heart was pounding in my ears. Suddenly, my uncle walked into the room. "Who are you talking to?" he asked, his voice snapping me out of the trance I had been in. I tried to explain, telling him that it was my cousin, that he was outside asking to come in. I felt ridiculous, saying it out loud, especially since I knew he was supposed to be somewhere else. My uncle went outside to check, and I waited anxiously, my mind racing. A few minutes later, he returned and told me there was no one out there. He even checked down the street and in the backyard, but he found nothing. I was left standing there, confused and more than a little freaked out. What had I heard? Who had been whispering outside my window? And why did it sound just like my cousin? That night, sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying what had happened, trying to make sense of it, but nothing fit. The whispering, the urgency, the strange feeling in my chest. It was like something was trying to make contact, but I didn't know what. The next morning, I asked my aunt about my cousin. She told me he had spent the night at his friend's house. I waited for him to come home, but by the time he showed up, I was already on edge. I asked him if his mom had told him what I had mentioned to her, and he looked at me, clearly freaked out. "I didn't go outside last night," he said, his voice tight. "I was at my friend's the whole time." We both stood there for a moment, both unsure what to make of it. The thing my cousin had mentioned, the strange figure in their house, the whispering voices outside my window, it didn't add up. It felt like we were dealing with something beyond our understanding, something we couldn't quite explain away. In the days that followed, the unease in the house grew. My aunt, in an attempt to bring peace, decided to have the house blessed. It seemed like a desperate move, but it worked. After that, the whispers stopped, and the strange feeling that had hung in the air faded away. My cousin's family never saw that thing again. But for me, that night never left my mind. The whispers, the strange voice that sounded just like my cousin, the fear that gripped me, it was something I would never forget. And to this day, I still wonder what it was. Was it a trick of the mind, or something else entirely? The house was never quite the same, and neither were we. Something had changed that night, something we couldn't explain. And for me, the feeling of being watched, of hearing things that shouldn't have been there, lingers still. I don't know what it was, but it was real, and I'll never forget it. When I was in high school, I lived with my aunt in Oregon while my parents and brother remained in Arizona. It was a significant change, moving from the dry heat of Arizona to the damp, overcast skies of the Pacific Northwest. The days were shorter, the nights longer, and the persistent drizzle seemed to seep into everything, including my mood. I was 17, navigating the complexities of adolescence in a new environment, away from the familiar comforts of home. One night, I had a dream that was so vivid it felt real. In the dream, I was driving up a winding road that led to a lookout point above a canyon. The road was narrow, flanked by tall pine trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The sky was a deep indigo, stars scattered across it like diamonds on velvet. As I reached the top, I saw my brother's truck parked near the edge of the lookout. I pulled in behind it and turned off the engine. I stepped out of my car and immediately noticed two figures. One was my brother, standing with his back to me, gazing out over the canyon. The other was his friend Brian, who was walking toward me. Brian greeted me and told me it was nice to see me, but that I should leave. I was confused and asked him what was wrong with my brother. He didn't answer, just looked at me with a mixture of sadness and urgency. I turned my attention back to my brother, sensing that something was off. He stood motionless, his posture rigid, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't really there. I woke up the next morning with the dream still fresh in my mind. It lingered throughout the day, casting a shadow over everything I did. I couldn't concentrate in class, and my thoughts kept drifting back to the dream. There was a sense of unease that I couldn't shake, as if I had missed something important. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a dream, but the feeling persisted. That evening, around 5 p.m., my father called, waking me from a nap. He was looking for my mother's phone number. My brother had been snowboarding earlier that day and had jumped off a small cliff, breaking his leg in 6 places below the knee. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't help but think about the dream and whether it had been a warning. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about the dream and the accident. Was it a coincidence? Or had my subconscious somehow sensed that something was going to happen to my brother? I had never had a dream about him before, and I haven't had one since. The experience left me with more questions than answers. I began to read about dreams and their meanings, trying to find some explanation. I learned that dreams can be influenced by our emotions, experiences, and even our environment. Stress and anxiety can lead to vivid dreams, and sometimes our subconscious picks up on things that our conscious mind misses. But I couldn't recall feeling particularly stressed or anxious before the dream. I also read about the concept of precognitive dreams, dreams that predict future events. While there are many anecdotal accounts of such dreams, there's little scientific evidence to support their existence. Still, the idea intrigued me. Could my dream have been a premonition? I thought about the details of the dream: the canyon, the lookout point, my brother's truck, Brian's warning. None of it made sense in the context of the accident. My brother had been snowboarding, not driving up to a canyon. But perhaps the dream wasn't meant to be taken literally. Maybe it was symbolic, representing a danger or a turning point in my brother's life. I also considered the possibility that the dream was a manifestation of my own fears and anxieties. Being away from my family, I often worried about their well-being. Perhaps the dream was a reflection of those concerns, amplified by the distance and my feelings of helplessness. Over time, the intensity of the dream faded, but the memory remained. It served as a reminder of the deep connection I have with my brother, even across the miles. It also made me more attuned to my dreams and the messages they might convey. In the end, I may never know for sure what the dream meant or why I had it, but it taught me to pay attention to my instincts and to the subtle cues that our minds and bodies give us. Sometimes, our subconscious knows more than we realize, and it's worth listening to. Some real weird stuff used to happen years ago, here in the exact same room I'm in at the moment. I had to rewrite this since my English is getting worse, but bear with me. I own a closet that is huge and is mainly two big mirrors that you can slide left to right, with a wood structure inside with drawers. This closet is where I keep my clothes at the moment, and it's been around for more than 13 years. Years ago, I used to own a very small and old Sony TV that fit perfectly inside the closet, and I used it almost every day. One time, I came home from a party. I sat down and started taking off my shoes, and I could hear static coming from inside the closet, like someone was messing with my TV and left it on a bad channel. As I'm looking up straight to where the noise was coming from, someone or something punched the closet from the inside. This was a strong and loud punch to the right closet door. The closet had both doors closed at the moment. I just froze. I couldn't believe that. I seriously froze, full-on goosebumps, and stared at the closet for at least 10 minutes before deciding to go towards it. I got real close to the right door, and for some reason, just tried hearing whatever was going on inside my closet. And boom, another punch, like a legit punch. Almost like someone from the inside even knew I was standing right there. I opened the door and nothing. Everything was fine. I want to believe that somehow a drawer slid out and hit the door, and then went back to its place somehow twice. So I slid the door and moved on to the next weird thing, which is my small TV in the same closet that was on, making a bunch of noise. I got the remote and slid the door, sat on my bed, and looked at the TV for a moment, and there it was, channel 666 on the TV. I'm not even kidding. I've been an atheist all my life, just like my father. I don't believe in this kind of stuff, but there it was. You know what's crazy? I switched channels and noticed that my small Sony TV could not go higher than 99, even with the remote. You could try to put channel 666, and it was always channel 99. I started working at the indoor rodeo when I was 15. It was kind of a known place where I grew up. Everybody had been there at least once, usually for the Saturday night shows. It wasn't some big commercial place or anything, but locally, it was a big deal. You'd hear stories about it being haunted, like how some guy died during a bull ride in the 80s, or how people would see things in the stands when the place was empty. But I didn't believe in any of that. Not really. I figured it was just old town gossip, stuff people said to sound interesting. I was just happy to have a job. My mom had been working there for years already, so when I turned 15, it made sense for me to start working with her. The building itself was massive and old. Big metal beams and wooden catwalks up top, creaky floors in the hallways, and the kind of paint that looked like it had been slapped on 30 years ago and never touched again. The place smelled like dirt, horses, sweat, leather, and something musty, like old wood left out in the rain. It had this kind of smell that stuck to your clothes even after you left, and for the first couple of weeks, I hated it. I used to take a shower as soon as I got home just to get the smell off me. After a while, though, you don't even notice it. My job changed depending on the night. Sometimes I'd clean out the pens, sometimes I'd run concessions, sometimes I'd help with the gate or take tickets. My mom mostly worked with the office side of things, inventory, schedules, some bookkeeping. We'd stay long after the rodeo ended, until everything was shut down and locked up. On weekends, that meant we were there till midnight or later, sometimes 2 a.m. At first, I liked being one of the last people out. It felt like I had access to this big, empty world when it was just us. But then I started noticing things. It didn't hit me all at once. It wasn't some big event or some monster in the dark. It was more like a slow drip. The first time I remember feeling off was maybe my third week working there. I was sweeping under the bleachers with a big push broom. It was quiet, which was normal, but it felt like someone was watching me. Not like someone was around or like I could hear something, just the cold, solid feeling that someone was looking at me and standing still. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see one of the cowboys or one of the older workers messing with me, but there was never anyone there. I laughed it off in my head and just kept working. But that feeling didn't really go away. I'd catch shadows moving in places that didn't make sense. A shadow on a wall when there was nothing nearby to cast it. Once I saw what looked like someone ducking behind a pillar on the far side of the stands. Only when I went over there, it was empty. Then there were cold spots. That place had no AC, and the air moved slowly even with the giant fans. But sometimes I'd walk into a pocket of air that felt like walking into a freezer. Not just cool, but like I'd stepped into a walk-in refrigerator. I'd even shiver and feel goosebumps rising on my arms and neck. The worst part was I could never make sense of where the cold air came from. The building was old. I figured maybe it was something to do with the ventilation or drafts from the rafters, but it never felt natural. Still, I didn't talk about it. I didn't want to be that person. I figured maybe I was tired or psyching myself out because of all the ghost stories I'd heard growing up. That worked for a while. Then, after about a year of working there, something happened on the drive home that changed everything for me. It was one of those long nights. The place was mostly empty by about 11:30, and we stayed till close to 1 a.m. I helped Mom finish inventory in the back office and took out the trash. We locked up the gates and walked out to the car. I remember I was exhausted. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and I just wanted to get home and crash. We were driving down that long road just past the rodeo. On one side of the road, there's a massive brick wall that runs the entire length of the street. On the other side is a big, open field. Nothing in it, just grass and dirt stretching out into darkness. That road never had much lighting. The headlights did most of the work. We were maybe 5 minutes into the drive when I saw something. A man walking. He came from the wall's side and was heading toward the field. He had a weird limp, almost like he was dragging one of his legs, and he was wearing a cowboy hat. Not unusual for the area, honestly, but something about the way he was walking made me pay attention. He wasn't in the headlights yet, but I could clearly see his silhouette. The moon was bright that night, and it outlined his body just enough. He looked solid, real. He didn't look up, just kept limping slowly across the road. And then he was gone, just like that. 1 second he was there, halfway across the road, and the next, nothing. I sat up straight and looked out my window. There was nobody. No one in the road, no one in the field. Just open space. My heart was pounding, but I didn't say anything. I felt stupid, like maybe I was overtired or my eyes had played a trick on me. I kept going over it in my head, telling myself that headlights do weird things sometimes, or that maybe the shadows made it look like someone was there. I was halfway through trying to talk myself out of it when my mom said, "Did you see the man in the cowboy hat?" It felt like someone poured ice water down my back. I hadn't even finished forming the thought in my head, let alone said anything out loud. But she'd seen him too. The exact same thing. She hadn't seen where he went either. The rest of the ride home was quiet. Neither of us knew what to say. We just kept thinking about how solid he looked, how real. And then he was gone. That didn't sit right with either of us. It wasn't the kind of thing that disappears. He wasn't shadowy or distant. He was right there. And then he wasn't. After that, everything at the rodeo felt worse. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. I'd walk past a dark hallway and see someone standing at the far end. Only when I'd turn and look directly, they'd be gone. I started avoiding the hallways completely. I took longer routes just to avoid certain areas, even if it meant more work. The statue in the front foyer became a problem. It was just a bronze cowboy on a bucking horse, life-size and detailed. But if you weren't looking straight at it, it looked like the cowboy was turning his head. I can't count how many times I'd be walking by and see, out of the corner of my eye, his head move just a little, like he was watching me. When I turned to look, he was facing straight ahead again, like he hadn't moved at all. I tried telling myself it was just my imagination or light tricks, but after a while, I just avoided walking near it altogether. And then there were the sounds. Whispers when the place was empty. Soft, low voices that didn't sound like they were coming from any one direction. Sometimes I'd hear little girls laughing. It wasn't often, but when it happened, it was always when I was alone. The sound would be faint, like it was coming from across the arena, but the entire place would be locked down and empty. Once, I saw a red balloon floating about 5 feet off the ground down one of the back hallways. There were no kids there that night, no parties, no leftover decorations. I watched it float and bounce slightly, like it was being carried by someone walking slowly. But there was nothing holding it. No string, no hand, no person. Just this balloon floating down the corridor and then around a corner. But the worst thing that happened was in the East Wing ladies' restroom. I avoided that bathroom as much as I could. It always felt colder than the rest of the building, and not just because of bad ventilation. There was a silence in there that felt heavier, like the sound itself was being swallowed up. You'd step inside and feel like someone was behind you, always behind you. But one night, I didn't have a choice. It was late. Most people had left. I had to pee bad, and the West Wing restroom was already locked. I couldn't hold it anymore, so I ran into the East Wing bathroom. It was dead silent inside. I picked the middle stall without thinking. The second I sat down, I regretted it. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like something was waiting. I heard the door open. I thought it was my mom. She was the only other person who could still be in the building at that hour. I called out to her, but there was no response. I looked under the stall door, but I didn't see any feet. Still, I heard footsteps. Soft, slow ones. They walked all the way to the last stall on the end and stopped. Then came the tapping. Light taps on the metal door, followed by the slow creak of it swinging open. More footsteps. Then tapping on the next stall. Then that door creaked open. Now I was panicking. I looked under the stall again. No feet. I looked up, afraid of what I might see. Nothing. Then the tapping started on my stall. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Then the lock started to jiggle. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could and kicked the door. I kept trying to slam it shut again, but I was so panicked I couldn't even connect with it. I peed all over myself. I couldn't control anything. The lock clicked and the door creaked open, slowly, and I just kept screaming. I was thrashing and kicking and couldn't make anything stop. Then I heard giggling. Light, playful. A little girl. And then footsteps running away. I kept screaming even after the sound was gone. I couldn't stop. My mom found me like that. She thought I was having a seizure or something. I was curled on the floor, soaked in pee, shaking so hard I could barely hold myself up. She sat with me on the bathroom floor until I calmed down enough to speak. I quit that night. No warning. No 2-week notice. I couldn't go back. I didn't care if I never worked again. Nothing was worth going back in there. Even now, years later, I still don't know what I saw or heard. I don't believe in ghosts, not really. But I believe something was wrong in that building. Maybe it was the energy, the history, or something worse. I don't know, but it was real. All of it. I felt it in my bones. Sometimes I still... It started when I was about 9 years old. We lived in a 2-story house that sat near the edge of a cul-de-sac in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where kids rode their bikes until dinner, where neighbors waved from their lawns, and every backyard had a fence with half-wilted flowers leaning against it. Ours was no different, except that the house had something in it. Something that only made itself known slowly, quietly, almost like it wanted us to get used to it before it really showed up. My brothers and I were close in age, 2 years apart each. I was the oldest. The middle one, B, was about 7 at the time, and the youngest was 5. They shared the bedroom directly across the hall from mine. If I left my door open at night, I could see directly into their room. Same the other way around. At first, it was small stuff. Things we could brush off without much thought. A remote going missing and showing up on top of the fridge. Toys moving from the floor to the dresser. Lights flickering sometimes, the ones in the hallway mostly. It wasn't the kind of thing that made you scared. Just little annoyances. I figured it was one of my brothers playing games, or maybe just forgetting where they'd put things. The way kids do. But then it got weirder. I remember waking up one night, not from a sound or a nightmare, but just suddenly being awake. The hallway was dark, but I could see my brother's room because the light was turning on and off. Slowly. Steady. On. Off. On. Off. Like someone was pressing the switch methodically. I stood up, still half asleep, and walked to the doorway. I leaned on the frame and watched. He was sitting on the top bunk, staring straight ahead. His arm dangled down the side of the bed, his hand lazily flicking the light switch up and down like it was the only thing keeping him conscious. His face was pale, like all the color had drained out. He didn't even blink. I just stood there, too confused to speak. My mom must have heard the light too, because she appeared behind me in the hallway a few seconds later. I remember her hand on my shoulder. She said his name sharply, telling him to stop fooling around and go to sleep. But he didn't stop right away. He slowly turned his head toward us, not just his eyes, His whole head moved like it was hard to lift. He looked at us for a long time without saying anything, like he was trying to decide if it was safe to speak. Then, in this flat voice that didn't sound like him at all, he said, "They can only move in the dark. They keep getting closer. When I turn the light off, they can almost touch me now. Goodbye." My mom didn't say anything for a second. She just stood there frozen. Then she snapped out of it and told all three of us to come to her room. She locked the door, turned on the bedside lamp, and we slept like that, all of us squeezed into the same bed. I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about what he'd said. The next morning, I asked B what he meant. He didn't answer at first. Then he looked up from his cereal with this blank expression and said that every time the light turned off, he could see kids coming out of the closet. He said they were darker than shadows, like they were made out of something blacker than anything else. You could only see their outlines because of these faint white lines that traced their shapes. He said they had white, empty eyes, and they just stood there until the lights went off again. Then they'd move closer. He said at first they just stood in the closet, but after a few nights they started walking out of it, one at a time. Every time the light went out, more would appear. He said they would crawl toward the bed, pulling themselves across the carpet, reaching up toward him, but they never touched the youngest brother who slept on the bottom bunk. Only him. It freaked me out. But the thing that messed me up more than anything was that he didn't sound like he was telling a scary story. He just said it like he was describing something completely normal, like it was real. After that, he refused to sleep with the closet door open. Eventually, both of my brothers asked my mom to put a lock on it. Not just a simple latch, either. They wanted a chain lock, like the kind you see on apartment doors. She thought it was ridiculous, but she did it anyway, maybe just to shut them up. Maybe because part of her believed it, too, even if she wouldn't say it. I started sleeping in their room, at first just to make them feel better. I'd lie on the floor in a sleeping bag, facing the closet door. The lock made us feel safer. The first night we had it, I actually started to relax. I even laughed a little before bed, thinking maybe it had all just been in our heads. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, the door slammed open. The sound was so loud it made my chest jump. The chain held, but the door swung as far as it could and hit the metal stopper with a loud crack. The noise echoed through the room. I sat up so fast I knocked over the little plastic nightstand next to my sleeping bag. And there, in the gap of the door, between the doorframe and the chain, I saw them. Small hands. Thin, black, jagged fingers scratching and pushing through the space. Not a dream. Not a shadow. All three of us saw them. We screamed so loud my mom came running again. But by the time she got there, the hands were gone, and the door was gently swinging like it had never slammed. She didn't believe us. Or maybe she didn't want to. She said it was just the weight of the door, a bad dream, the wind, anything but what we knew we saw. The next few months were hell. The door would shake, rattle, creak. At first just at night, then more often. Sometimes it would make this tapping sound, like someone was drumming their fingers on the inside. Sometimes we heard whispers, coaxing, pleading, begging us to let them out. The voices didn't sound like kids. They were too hollow, too slow, like someone speaking underwater. They'd get louder when the room was dark. We started keeping the lights on all night. Lamps, flashlights, anything we could get. But the power would flicker sometimes. Once the bulb in our ceiling light popped and shattered. We sat up for hours in the glow of my old Game Boy screen because it was the only thing left working. We were terrified to go near the closet. Eventually, I stopped sleeping in there. I couldn't take it anymore. My brothers stayed together, but they barely slept. They looked exhausted all the time. Dark circles under their eyes, jumpy, scared of the dark even in the middle of the day. My mom called it a phase. Said we were too into scary movies or making things up. But it lasted almost a year. Every night the same routine. The door rattling, the hands, the whispers. And then one night, it just stopped. Completely. No sound. No movement. Nothing. The closet door didn't so much as creak. The light bulb stayed intact. We started sleeping again. Eventually we even forgot to leave the lights on. Time passed. We never got an explanation. Nothing ever happened again in that room. We lived in that house until I was 18. 13 years in total. Things still happen from time to time. Flickering lights, weird cold spots, strange sounds late at night. But nothing like that year with the closet. Nothing even close. After I moved out, I didn't think much about it. I went to college, got a job, got my own place. By some weird coincidence, or maybe just bad luck, I ended up renting the house right next door to my old one. It hadn't been intentional. I just found a place that was close to work and within my budget. At first, it was kind of funny. I'd look out my kitchen window and see our old backyard. The rusted swings set still in the same spot, the patch of dead grass under the old tree still there. But after a while, the memories started creeping back. I worked late shifts then, so I'd take my dog out for walks around 2 or 3 in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet at that time, dead silent, just the hum of street lamps and the occasional bark in the distance. One night, we were walking down the sidewalk past my old house. My dog stopped suddenly, ears perked up, staring at the back window of what used to be my brother's bedroom. I looked up and felt my stomach drop. The light in the room was turning on and off. On, off, on, off. Slowly, steadily, just like it had all those years ago. I stood there staring at it until it stopped. No movement inside, no shadows, just darkness. I saw it again the next night, and the night after that, always around the same time, the exact same rhythm. Eventually, I saw the new family that had moved in, a single mom and her 3 sons, all around the same age we were when it started, maybe a year younger or older, but close. They looked happy during the day. I never heard any yelling, never saw anything strange, but I wondered. I couldn't help it. I started digging. I looked up the property records, news articles, anything I could find. The house was built in 1980 or 1981. It had a young family living there. Dad worked in the mines and was rarely home. Mom stayed with the kids. In 1987, there was a fire. An electrical short in one of the walls sparked in the middle of the night. The kids, 3 boys, got trapped in the bedroom. Same one my brothers had. They died of smoke inhalation. Only 2 of the bodies were recovered. The 3rd boy was never found. The mom survived but killed herself a year later. The house sat empty, burned out for 2 years before it was rebuilt. Between 1989 and 1997, a few different families lived there. A baby died from SIDS. A man hung himself in the basement. A girl slit her wrists in the upstairs bathroom. Her brother shot himself the next year. The police ruled each case independently. No one connected them, but it seemed like too many tragedies for one house. We moved in 2004, stayed until 2012. After us, there were a few quiet years. Then another single mom with 3 boys moved in, just like before. I don't know what any of it means. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe not.